The telegram trembled in Maggie Cole's gloved hands, each word a knife to the heart. Arrangements canceled. Stop. Chose. Another stop. Do not come stop. The train platform stretched empty in both directions, wind whipping across the Wyoming frontier with nothing to break its fury. 24 years old, carrying every possession she owned in 2 battered carpet bags, and nowhere left to go. The man who'd promised marriage sight unseen had taken one look at the photograph she'd sent, her full figure honest in every line, and decided she wasn't worth keeping. Behind her, the train whistle screamed its departure. Ahead, only the vast and merciless West. Before we begin Maggie's journey from rejection to belonging, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's step onto that windswept platform where everything is about to change. Did the November wind cut across the Cheyenne train platform with the kind of cold that found every gap in clothing, every exposed inch of skin? Maggie Cole stood motionless, reading the telegram for the 4th time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something bearable. They didn't. Arrangements canceled, stop, chose, another, stop, do not come, stop. 14 words. That's all it took to destroy the future she'd spent 3 months building in her mind. 14 words from a man she'd never met, a rancher named Howard Garrett who'd advertised for a mail-order bride in the Boston newspapers, a man who'd written her 3 carefully worded letters asking about her domestic skills, her temperament, her willingness to embrace frontier life. A man who'd never once mentioned that her photograph, the one she'd sent with painful honesty, showing her full figure in unforgiving clarity, might be a problem. Until apparently it was. The train that had carried her 2,000 miles west pulled away from the platform, black smoke rising against a sky the color of old pewter. Maggie watched it disappear around the bend, taking with it her ticket back to Boston, her escape route, her last thread of connection to anything familiar. She was alone. Her carpetbags sat at her feet, everything she owned packed into worn leather that had belonged to her father. The good dress she'd saved for meeting her intended husband. 3 serviceable work dresses. Undergarments she'd sewn herself, sized to fit a body that had never matched what the world expected. Her mother's Bible. A daguerreotype of parents 5 years dead. $73 in a cloth purse, meant to last until her wedding, until she became some rancher's wife, and her financial worries became his responsibility. $73 wouldn't get her back to Boston. Wouldn't get her anywhere, really, except maybe 2 weeks in a boarding house while she searched for work that didn't exist for women like her. The platform was nearly empty now, just a porter loading freight onto a handcart and a well-dressed couple waiting for the eastbound train. The woman's eyes had already found Maggie, that particular flicker of assessment women used on each other. Maggie knew what she saw. A heavy-set young woman in a traveling suit that had been let out twice to accommodate hips that had never been fashionable, a waist that corseting could improve but never truly cinch, brown hair fighting its pins despite her best efforts, a face that might have been called pleasant if it had been attached to a slimmer frame, but instead just seemed unremarkable, forgettable, unwanted. The woman whispered something to her husband, and they both looked away. Maggie's throat tightened. She'd spent her whole life being looked away from. In Boston, the daughters of her mother's friends had married at 18, 19, 20. Maggie had watched them all walk down aisles in churches she'd attended since childhood, wearing white gowns and triumphant smiles while she sat in pews and pretended not to notice the pitying glances. By 22, even the pity had faded. She'd become invisible instead, the spinster daughter of dead parents, living with an aunt who made it clear that housing an unmarriageable niece was a burden she bore with Christian resignation. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like salvation, a chance to be useful, to be wanted, even if that wanting was practical rather than romantic. She hadn't expected love. She'd expected partnership, purpose, a home of her own instead of existing on her aunt's charity. She'd expected to matter to someone. The telegram crumpled in her fist. She'd been a fool to expect anything at all. "Mama, Mama, wait!" The child's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Maggie turned to see a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, racing across the platform toward the tracks. She wore a blue calico dress and had dark braids flying behind her as she ran, her face streaked with tears. Behind her, a boy of the same age was trying to keep up, calling, "Emma, stop! Papa said to stay by the wagon!" But Emma wasn't stopping. She was running full tilt toward the edge of the platform, toward the tracks where the eastbound train was approaching, its whistle already sounding in the distance. Maggie moved without thinking. Her carpetbags hit the platform as she lunged forward, her body launching into motion with a speed that surprised her. The well-dressed couple shouted something. The porter dropped his handcart, but Maggie's entire focus had narrowed to the child racing toward the iron rails, to the train growing larger by the second, to the disaster about to unfold. She caught Emma 3 feet from the platform's edge. The momentum carried them both down hard, Maggie twisting at the last second to take the impact on her shoulder and hip, while the child landed against her chest. Pain exploded through her body as they hit the rough wooden planks, splinters driving through her traveling suit, her head cracking against the platform with enough force to make her vision swim. But Emma was safe. The little girl was crying, struggling against Maggie's arms, still reaching toward the tracks. "Mama, I need Mama." "Hush now," Maggie heard herself say, her voice rough with pain and breathlessness. "Hush, sweetheart. You're safe. You're safe." "Emma!" The man who skidded to a stop beside them was tall and rangy, with dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of years under the Wyoming sun. He dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he reached for the child, his eyes wild with the particular terror only a parent could know. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thank God, Emma, you can't run like that." "I wanted Mama," Emma wailed against his chest. "I saw the lady in the blue dress and I thought, "I know, baby girl, I know." The man's voice cracked. He pressed his face into Emma's hair, his whole body trembling with reaction. Over the child's head, his eyes found Maggie's. "You saved her. Christ, you saved my daughter." Maggie tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her shoulder, her hip, the back of her skull. The platform seemed to tilt sideways. "Don't move." The man's hand was suddenly on her arm, steadying her. "You hit hard. You might be hurt worse than you think." "I'm fine," Maggie said automatically, though she wasn't sure it was true. Is the child all right?" "Emma?" The man shifted her gently, checking her over with practiced hands. "Just scared. But you, Sarah, I need you." The boy who'd been chasing Emma had run to a wagon parked near the platform. A moment later, a girl of perhaps 12 climbed down, her eyes going wide as she took in the scene. "Papa, what happened?" "Emma ran for the tracks. This woman stopped her." The man, the children's father, obviously, looked back at Maggie. "Can you stand?" "I think so." But when she tried, her legs didn't seem inclined to cooperate. The adrenaline that had powered her leap was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep shakiness and pain that was growing harder to ignore. The man caught her before she could fall, one arm supporting her while he still held Emma with the other. "Sarah, get the doctor," he ordered. "No," Maggie protested. "Please, I can't. I don't have money for a doctor." The man stared at her. "You just threw yourself in front of my daughter without a thought for your own safety, and you're worried about a doctor's fee?" "I'm worried about a lot of things," Maggie said, and to her absolute horror, felt tears burning behind her eyes. The shock was wearing off, reality flooding back in. The telegram, the canceled engagement, being stranded 2,000 miles from anything resembling home with less than $80 to her name. "But right now, I mostly need to sit down before I fall down." The man's expression shifted, something like understanding crossing his weathered features. "Sarah, forget the doctor for now. Help me get her to the wagon." Between them, they got Maggie upright and moving. Each step sent fresh jolts of pain through her bruised body, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. The alternative, collapsing on the platform like some helpless creature, was unthinkable. The wagon was a sturdy farm vehicle with a bench seat and a bed half full of supplies. The man helped Maggie onto the seat with surprising gentleness, then climbed up beside her with Emma still clutched to his chest. The boy, who had to be Emma's twin, scrambled into the back with Sarah. "I'm Ethan Rowland," the man said as he gathered the reins. "This is Emma, and that's Jacob back there with my eldest, Sarah. And you are?" "Maggie Cole." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, shock still dulling the edges of everything. From Boston. Long way from home, Miss Cole. Mrs., Maggie heard herself say, though it was a lie. The wedding that would have made it true had been canceled 14 words ago. And I don't have a home. Not anymore. Ethan Rowland gave her a long, measuring look. Then he clicked to the horses and steered them away from the platform. Right now you're coming to mine. We'll sort out the rest after we make sure you're not seriously hurt. Maggie wanted to protest. Wanted to explain that she couldn't impose on strangers, that she needed to find a boarding house, that she had plans to make, and a future to salvage from the ruins of this disaster. But the words wouldn't come. The shock, the pain, the accumulated weight of rejection and fear and exhaustion, it all crashed over her at once. She closed her eyes and let Ethan Rowland take her wherever he was going because she had nowhere else to go anyway. The Rowland Ranch sat in a valley 12 miles from Cheyenne, accessible only by a rutted dirt road that made every jostle of the wagon a fresh agony for Maggie's bruised body. She kept her eyes closed for most of the journey, partly from pain and partly because she couldn't bear to see Ethan Rowland looking at her with whatever mixture of gratitude and pity currently occupied his thoughts. She'd saved his daughter. That was good. That mattered. But it didn't change the fact that another man had taken one look at her photograph and decided she wasn't worth having. The wagon finally slowed and Maggie forced her eyes open. The ranch house was modest but well built, a single-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Beyond it, she could see a barn, a chicken coop, a corral with several horses, and the kind of carefully tended infrastructure that spoke of years of hard work. Home, Ethan said simply. He set the brake and climbed down, then reached up to help Maggie. Easy now, Sarah, get some water heated. Jacob, see to the horses. The children scattered to their tasks with the efficiency of long practice. Only Emma remained, still clinging to her father with the desperate grip of a child who'd been badly frightened. Let's get you inside, Ethan said to Maggie. You can rest while Sarah makes some coffee. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, furnished with the practicality of a widower's household. A main room served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor. Doors led off to what had to be bedrooms. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting welcome warmth after the bitter wind outside. Ethan guided Maggie to a rocking chair near the fire, then finally pried Emma loose and sent her to help Sarah. The little girl went reluctantly, looking back at Maggie with wide, solemn eyes. She thinks you're an angel, Ethan said quietly, pulling up a chair to face Maggie. That's what she told Jacob in the wagon, said an angel caught her before the train came. I'm not an angel. Maggie's voice was flat. Just someone who was in the right place at the right time. Well, I'm grateful either way. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her with an intensity that made Maggie want to look away. What happened at the station, Mrs. Cole? You said you don't have a home anymore. The direct question, asked in that gentle tone, nearly undid her. Maggie stared at the fire, watching the flames consume the logs with indifferent efficiency. I came west to marry a man I'd never met, she said finally. A rancher who advertised for a wife. We corresponded. He seemed adequate. I thought... She stopped, swallowed hard. When I arrived at the station, there was a telegram. He'd changed his mind, chose someone else. The silence that followed felt heavy with judgment. Maggie forced herself to continue. I sent him a photograph, an honest one. I thought... She gestured vaguely at her body, at the curves that had always been her curse. I thought if he knew what I looked like, there wouldn't be any unpleasant surprises. But apparently he's a fool, Ethan interrupted. Maggie's head snapped up. Ethan was still watching her, but there was anger in his eyes now, anger directed at someone who wasn't her. A man who judges a woman's worth by the width of her waist isn't worth having anyway, he continued. My late wife, Anna, she wasn't a small woman. Strong, capable, built for frontier life. Most beautiful thing I ever saw. His voice softened. She died 18 months ago. Fever. Went from healthy to gone in 3 days. I'm sorry, Maggie whispered. Me too. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. The children, Emma especially, they're still struggling. Sarah tries to be the woman of the house, but she's 12, too young to be mother to 5-year-old twins, and He looked away. I'm not enough. Not for what they need. Sarah appeared with 2 cups of coffee, setting them on the small table between the chairs. She was a serious girl with her father's dark hair and a competence beyond her years. Emma's calmed down, she reported. Jacob's reading to her from that book about horses. Thank you, sweetheart. Ethan waited until Sarah had retreated to the kitchen before speaking again. Mrs. Cole, I have a proposition for you. Maggie tensed. She'd heard that tone before, from men who thought a desperate woman might be amenable to arrangements no decent woman would consider. Not that kind of proposition, Ethan said quickly, as if reading her thoughts. I need help with the children. Real help. A governess, a teacher, someone who can give them the kind of attention and learning they need, the kind I can't provide while running a ranch. He paused. You came west to start a new life. The position I'm offering isn't marriage, but it is honest work, room and board, and a wage besides, if you're interested. Maggie stared at him. You want to hire me? You don't even know me. I know you threw yourself between my daughter and a train without hesitating. I know you're educated. I can hear it in the way you speak. I know you're alone and need somewhere to land. Ethan met her eyes steadily. And I know my children need someone exactly like you. Someone like me, Maggie repeated. The words tasted bitter. In Boston, someone like you had meant someone unsuitable, unmarriageable, too large and too plain to merit serious consideration. Someone brave, Ethan said quietly. Someone kind. Someone who doesn't think twice about protecting a child she's never met. He stood, crossing to the window that looked out over the valley. This is hard country, Mrs. Cole. It takes a certain strength to survive it. I think you have that strength. The offer hung in the air between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Maggie knew she should ask practical questions about the wage, about her duties, about the sleeping arrangements, but what came out instead was, why would you trust a stranger with your children? Ethan turned back to face her. In the fading afternoon light, he looked tired and weathered and absolutely sincere. Because my daughter is alive right now because of you, he said simply. That's all the recommendation I need. Maggie stayed. There wasn't really another choice, not with $73 and no prospects and 2,000 miles of distance between her and the aunt who'd barely tolerated her presence. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to realize that Ethan Rowland's offer had been more than mere charity born of gratitude. He genuinely needed help, desperately. The ranch work consumed his days from before dawn until after dark. Cattle to tend, horses to train, fences to mend, hay to cut and store before winter hit in earnest. He'd been managing alone for 18 months, and the strain showed in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders never quite relaxed even when he sat down to supper. The children, meanwhile, had been raising themselves with Sarah's 12-year-old determination as their primary guidance. Maggie found her rhythm quickly. Mornings meant lessons at the kitchen table, reading, arithmetic, geography, from an outdated atlas that had belonged to Anna Rowland. The twins were bright and eager, soaking up knowledge with the particular intensity of children who'd been intellectually starved. Sarah was more reserved, but Maggie could see the hunger in her eyes when they discussed literature, history, the wider world beyond the Wyoming frontier. Afternoons meant practical work. Maggie helped Sarah with the cooking, the washing, the endless tasks that kept a frontier household functioning. She learned to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to make soap from lye and rendered fat. Her hands, which had been soft from Boston's genteel idleness, grew rough and capable. And slowly, painfully, she began to win Emma's fragile trust. The little girl had nightmares. 3 or 4 times a week, Maggie would wake to the sound of screaming from the children's room, and she'd go to find Emma thrashing in her bed, calling for her mother with a desperation that broke Maggie's heart. "She's not coming, baby," Maggie would whisper, holding the child against her chest and rocking her gently. "Your mama's not coming, but I'm here. I've got you." "I want Mama," Emma would sob. "Why won't she come back?" There was no good answer to that question, no words that could explain death to a 5-year-old who'd lost the center of her world. So Maggie just held her, night after night, until the tears subsided and Emma's breathing evened out into sleep. During the days, Emma shadowed her constantly. Where Maggie went, Emma followed, a small, solemn presence that seemed to be constantly evaluating whether this new woman could be trusted with the gaping wound her mother's death had left behind. "Why are you so big?" Emma asked one afternoon while they were folding laundry together. Maggie's hands stilled on the sheet she'd been smoothing. It was the question she'd been dreading, the one that always came eventually. Even children noticed, especially children with their brutal honesty. "That's just how I'm built," she said carefully. "Some people are tall, some are short, some are thin, some are round. I'm round." "My mama was round too," Emma said. "Papa says she was strong. Says strong women have to be big to hold all that strength inside." Something in Maggie's chest cracked open. She looked at Emma, this serious little girl with her mother's eyes, and felt tears threatening for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch. "Your papa sounds like a wise man," she managed. "He misses Mama," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He cries sometimes at night. He thinks we don't know, but Jacob and me, we hear him." That night at supper, Maggie studied Ethan across the table. He was focused on cutting Jacob's meat, his movements automatic, his expression distant. She thought about him crying alone in his room, thought about him carrying 18 months of grief while trying to be strong for 3 children who were grieving their own way. "Mr. Rowland," she said quietly. His eyes lifted to hers. "It's Ethan, Mrs. Cole." We're past formality at this point. "Then it's Maggie." She took a breath. "I wanted to thank you for the opportunity you've given me. I know this wasn't what you expected when you made the offer, but I'm grateful." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. "You've been here 3 weeks, and I've already seen changes in the children." Sarah smiles more. "Jacob's reading has improved. Emma," he glanced at his daughter, who was industriously pushing peas around her plate. "Emma hasn't had a nightmare in 4 days. That's the longest stretch since Anna died." "She still misses her terribly," Maggie said. "I know. We all do." Ethan set down his fork. "But you've given her something Anna can't anymore. Comfort, consistency. Someone who shows up every night when she's scared." His voice dropped. "That matters more than you know." After the children were in bed, Maggie and Ethan fell into the habit of sharing coffee by the fire. It started accidentally, both of them too restless to sleep, both seeking the warmth and quiet of the main room. But it became routine, a peaceful hour where they could talk or sit in companionable silence, the day's work done, tomorrow's worries still distant. "Tell me about Boston," Ethan said one night. "There's not much to tell." Maggie stared into her cup. "I lived with my aunt after my parents died, helped her with her charitable work, attended church socials, watched all my friends get married and move on with their lives while She stopped. "While I became increasingly invisible." "I doubt you were invisible. You'd be surprised how easy it is to overlook someone who doesn't fit the expected mold." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "I'm too large, too plain, too much of everything that's wrong and not enough of anything that's right. The men who might have courted me took one look and decided to court someone else instead. The women who might have been friends kept me at a distance, as if being unmarried and heavy-set might be contagious." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My Anna used to say that people who judge worth by appearance are too shallow to hold anything meaningful inside them anyway." "Your Anna sounds like she was remarkable." "She was." Ethan's voice softened with memory. "Strong, stubborn, fiercely protective of the people she loved. She would have liked you, I think." The compliment settled warm in Maggie's chest. "I wish I could have known her." "The children talk about you the way they used to talk about her," Ethan said quietly, "not as a replacement, but as someone who fills some of the empty spaces she left behind." Maggie looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. In the firelight, his weathered face looked younger, more vulnerable. "I'm glad I can help," she said softly. "They're good children. You've raised them well. Anna raised them well. I'm just trying not to ruin what she started." Ethan set his cup aside. "But having you here, it's made me realize how much I was failing them, how much they needed more than I could give alone." You're not failing them. You're surviving. There's a difference. Maybe. Ethan stood, stretching tired muscles. I should let you get some rest. Morning comes early. But he didn't move toward his room. Instead, he stood there looking at Maggie with that same unreadable expression, and for a moment Maggie wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Not the roundness of her face, she hoped. Not the width of her hips or the softness of her arms. But maybe, possibly, the woman beneath all of that. The one who'd thrown herself at a moving child without thought. The one who rocked his daughter through nightmares and taught his son to read with patience and helped his eldest daughter carry burdens too heavy for 12-year-old shoulders. The woman who was beginning to feel, for the first time in her life, like she might actually matter. Good night, Maggie, Ethan said finally. Good night, Ethan. He left, and Maggie sat alone by the fire, thinking about second chances and unlikely sanctuaries and the strange paths that brought people together in the vast Wyoming darkness. Winter came early and hard, the first serious snow falling in mid-November. Maggie woke to find the valley transformed into something alien and beautiful. Everything she could see from her window covered in white that stretched unbroken to the mountains. The snow meant the children were confined indoors more, which meant longer lessons and more time for Maggie to discover just how hungry they were for learning, for stories, for the kind of intellectual engagement that had been missing from their lives. She taught them history through storytelling, making the American Revolution come alive through the perspectives of ordinary people caught in extraordinary times. She taught them mathematics through practical problems, how to calculate feed ratios for the livestock, how to measure acreage, how to budget household expenses. She taught them geography by tracing routes on the atlas and imagining the lives of people in distant places. And slowly, she taught them that learning itself was valuable, not just as preparation for adult life, but as a way of understanding the world and their place in it. Miss Maggie, Jacob asked one afternoon during a lesson about the solar system, if the Earth is spinning all the time, why don't we feel it? Because we're spinning with it, Maggie explained. Everything around us is moving at the same speed, so we don't notice. It's like being on a train. When you're inside, you feel still, even though you're actually moving very fast. Have you been on a train, Miss Maggie? The question, innocent enough, still made Maggie's throat tighten. Yes, Jacob, a very long one, all the way from Boston to Cheyenne. Was it scary? Emma asked. She was curled in Maggie's lap, something she did more and more often now, seeking physical comfort with a 5-year-old's unself-conscious need. Parts of it were, Maggie admitted. I was traveling alone to a place I'd never been, to meet people I'd never met. That's always a little frightening. But you came anyway, Sarah said. She was working on her arithmetic at the other end of the table, but Maggie knew she'd been listening to every word. That was brave. Or desperate, Maggie said before she could stop herself. Sarah looked up, her young face serious. Papa says brave and desperate are usually the same thing. Says people don't discover courage until they don't have any other choice. Maggie thought about that as she continued the lesson, about how desperation had driven her west, and how that same desperation had put her on the platform at the exact moment when Emma Rowland needed someone to save her life. Maybe there was no difference between brave and desperate. Maybe courage was just what you called it when you survived your own desperation and came out the other side. That evening, a blizzard rolled in from the north, transforming the already white world into a whiteout of wind and driving snow. Ethan came in from the barn covered in ice, his face raw from the cold. "Storm's going to be a bad one," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "I've got the livestock secured, but we'll need to keep the fires going all night." The children were already in their nightclothes, gathered around the main room's hearth for warmth. Maggie had been reading to them from a collection of frontier tales, but she set the book aside as Ethan joined them. "Is the storm dangerous, Papa?" Jacob asked. "Could be, if we're not careful. But we're safe inside and we've got plenty of wood and provisions." Ethan settled into his chair with a weariness that spoke of too many hours working in brutal cold. "We'll be fine." But as the night deepened and the wind howled around the house with increasing fury, Maggie began to wonder if Ethan's confidence was misplaced. The temperature inside dropped despite the fire, cold seeping through every crack and gap in the walls. The children huddled together under blankets, and even Sarah's usual stoicism showed cracks. "I'm cold," Emma whimpered. I can't get warm. Maggie pulled the little girl closer, wrapping her in another blanket. I know, sweetheart, the storm will pass. But it didn't pass. It intensified. By midnight, the wind was a constant shriek that made conversation difficult and sleep impossible. Ethan kept feeding the fire, but it couldn't keep pace with the cold invading the house. Maggie could see her breath in the air. We need to consolidate, Ethan said finally. Get everyone in one room, share body heat. Sarah, Jacob, Emma, bring your blankets and mattresses out here by the fire. They set up a makeshift camp in the main room, piling mattresses and blankets into a nest near the hearth. The children burrowed in together while Ethan kept watch over the fire, and Maggie tried to make everyone as comfortable as possible. Miss Maggie, will you tell us a story? Jacob asked through chattering teeth. So Maggie told stories. She told them about Boston winters, about ice skating on frozen ponds and sledding down snow-covered hills. She told them about the year her father got snowed in at his office and didn't make it home for 2 days, and how her mother had organized the entire neighborhood to check on elderly residents and make sure no one was forgotten in the storm. She told them about survival and community and the way people took care of each other when the world turned harsh. And slowly, despite the wind and the cold, the children's breathing evened out. Jacob fell asleep first, then Sarah, then finally Emma, her small hand clutched in Maggie's. Ethan added another log to the fire, then came to sit beside Maggie in the nest of blankets. You're good with them, he said quietly. They make it easy. Maggie looked down at Emma's sleeping face, so peaceful despite the storm raging outside. They're starved for attention, for stability. I'm just providing what they need. You're providing more than that. Ethan's voice was soft but intense. You're showing them what it looks like to be kind, to be patient, to face fear with grace. Those aren't small things, Maggie. The use of her first name, spoken with such warmth, made something flutter in Maggie's chest. She looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. I should check on you too, he said. Are you warm enough? I'm fine. You're shivering. Before Maggie could protest, Ethan draped another blanket around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. Their faces were close in the firelight, close enough that Maggie could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the way the flames cast shadows across his weathered features. Thank you, she whispered. For the blanket? For everything. For taking a chance on me when you had no reason to. For making me feel like I matter. Ethan's expression softened. Maggie, you saved my daughter's life. You've brought peace to my household and joy to my children. You matter more than you know. The storm howled outside, but inside, in the circle of firelight and blankets and sleeping children, Maggie felt safer than she had in years. She felt seen, and as she finally drifted toward sleep with Emma's hand in hers and Ethan's presence warm beside her, she thought that maybe, just maybe, being stranded in Wyoming wasn't the disaster she'd thought it was. Maybe it was exactly where she was supposed to be. The blizzard raged for 3 days. By the time it finally blew itself out, the world was buried under 4 feet of snow, drifts piled against the house, reaching nearly to the roof. Ethan spent the 4th day digging out paths to the barn, the chicken coop, the necessary. The children helped where they could, bundled in so many layers they looked like small, waddling bears. Maggie watched from the kitchen window while she worked on bread dough, her hands moving through the familiar rhythm of kneading while her mind wandered to dangerous territory. She'd been at the ranch for nearly 2 months now. 2 months of watching Ethan work himself to exhaustion every day, his quiet strength and steady patience evident in everything he did. 2 months of seeing the way he looked at his children with a love so fierce it hurt to witness. 2 months of late-night conversations by the fire, of shared laughter over small things, of moments when their eyes met across the room and something unspoken passed between them. 2 months of trying not to fall for a man who'd hired her to teach his children, not to complicate his life. The bread smells good, Maggie startled, turning to find Ethan in the kitchen doorway. He'd shed his heavy coat but was still pink-cheeked from the cold, ice melting in his dark hair. It'll be ready in about an hour, she said, forcing her voice to steadiness. The children are in the main room doing their lessons. I know, I checked on them. Ethan crossed to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot that always seemed to be brewing. I wanted to talk to you. Maggie's heart lurched. About what? About your wages. I realized I never properly settled on an amount when I hired you. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. I've been putting aside what seems fair, but I wanted to make sure it's adequate. The envelope was thick with bills. Maggie stared at it, her flour-dusted hands frozen on the bread dough. That's too much, she said faintly. It's what you're worth, what you've done for this family. Maggie, I can't put a price on that, but I can make sure you're not working for room and board alone. Ethan set the envelope on the counter. And there's something else I wanted to discuss. All right. Ethan took a breath, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Christmas is coming. It'll be our first without Anna, and I'm dreading it. The children are dreading it. Everything about the holiday is going to be a reminder of who's missing. I understand, Maggie said softly. I was hoping... Ethan paused, then met her eyes directly. I was hoping you might help me make it bearable, not happy. I don't think we're ready for happy yet, but maybe bearable, maybe even something they can look forward to instead of fear. The request was so vulnerable, so raw with honest need, that Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. Of course, whatever you need. I need them to see that life continues, that we can honor Anna's memory while still creating new memories of our own. Ethan's voice dropped. And I need you to know that having you here has made that possible. You've brought light back into this house, Maggie. I don't think you understand how much that means. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them seemed ready to say. Then Emma's voice called from the main room, breaking the spell. Miss Maggie! Jacob spilled ink on his arithmetic. Maggie managed a shaky smile. Duty calls. Maggie. Ethan caught her wrist gently as she moved past him. Thank you, for staying, for everything. His hand was warm against her skin, calloused from years of hard work, but infinitely gentle. Maggie looked down at where they connected, then up at Ethan's face, at the gratitude and something deeper shining in his eyes. You're welcome, she whispered, and fled to deal with Jacob's ink disaster before she did something foolish, like admit that she'd stay forever if he asked. Christmas preparations became a welcome distraction. Maggie had the children make paper chains and cut snowflakes from old newspapers. She taught them carols and helped them plan small gifts for each other. She baked cookies and breads, filling the house with scents that spoke of celebration and warmth. And through it all, she tried very hard not to notice the way Ethan watched her, or the way her heart leaped every time his hand brushed hers in passing, or the way she'd started thinking of this isolated Wyoming ranch as home in a way Boston had never been. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, Maggie and Ethan sat by the fire as had become their custom. But tonight felt different, charged with an awareness that made Maggie's pulse quicken. I have something for you, Ethan said quietly. He pulled a small package from his pocket, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. I know we didn't discuss gift-giving, but I wanted you to have this. Maggie opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a cameo brooch, delicate and beautiful, the kind of piece that belonged to a lady of means rather than a governess scraping by on wages. It was my mother's, Ethan said. She gave it to Anna when we married, and Anna wore it every Sunday to church. I thought... He paused, watching Maggie's face. I thought you should have it, as thanks for everything you've done for my family. I can't accept this, Maggie whispered, even as her fingers closed around the brooch. It's too valuable, too important. You're important, Ethan's voice was fierce. To me, to the children. You've become part of this family, Maggie, whether you meant to or not, and I wanted you to have something that reflects that. Maggie looked up at him, this weathered rancher with kind eyes and gentle hands, and felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. Ethan, But whatever she'd been about to say was lost as Ethan leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, his hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. And Maggie, who'd never been kissed like she mattered, like she was precious, felt something inside her break open and flood with light. When Ethan pulled back, His eyes were searching hers. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have presumed." "Don't apologize," Maggie breathed. "Please don't apologize." "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Ethan admitted, "but I wasn't sure if you felt—" "I feel," Maggie said. Then more firmly, "I feel everything, Ethan. I just didn't think you could possibly—" She gestured at herself, at the body that had always been her curse. "I didn't think someone like you would want someone like me." Ethan's expression turned fierce. "Someone like me? Maggie, I'm a widowed rancher with 3 grieving children and more burdens than any sane woman would willingly take on. You're educated, cultured, kind beyond measure. I'm the one who can't believe you'd consider me." "Then we're both fools," Maggie whispered. "Maybe." Ethan smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "But maybe we can be fools together." He kissed her again, and this time Maggie let herself believe in it. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd traveled 2,000 miles and had her heart broken on a train platform so she could end up exactly here, in the arms of a man who saw past her body to the worth beneath, in a house that felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever been. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle this time. And inside, by the fire's warm light, Maggie Cole finally believed she might be exactly where she belonged. Christmas morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the kind of winter day where breathing hurt, and the sun glittered off the snow with painful brightness. Maggie woke early, her heart still racing from the previous night's kiss, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips, as if she could still feel Ethan's warmth there. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, pinning the cameo brooch to her collar with trembling hands. In the small mirror above her washstand, she studied her reflection. The same round face, the same soft curves that had always marked her as unworthy. But something had changed. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a cautious hope that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The children were already stirring when she emerged from her room. Emma appeared first, her nightgown trailing as she ran to Maggie with a squeal of excitement. "It's Christmas! Miss Maggie, it's Christmas!" "I know, sweetheart." Maggie caught the little girl up, marveling as always at how easily Emma came to her now, how the nightmares had faded to perhaps once a week instead of nightly terrors. "Shall we see if your papa has the fire going?" But it was Sarah who met them in the main room, already dressed and working at the stove. The 12-year-old turned as they entered, and Maggie saw something flicker in her eyes, an awareness that made her stomach clench. "Papa's doing the morning chores," Sarah said carefully. "He said to tell you he'd be in shortly." The girl's tone was neutral, but Maggie caught the way Sarah's gaze dropped to the cameo brooch, then back to Maggie's face. She knows, Maggie thought, or suspects, and she wasn't sure if that knowledge made Sarah happy or troubled. Jacob thundered in from his room, destroying the moment with his usual enthusiasm. "Can we open presents now? Can we?" "After breakfast," Maggie said firmly, grateful for the distraction. "Come help me set the table." They'd just finished a simple meal of porridge and bacon when Ethan came in, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes found Maggie's immediately, and the warmth in them made her breath catch, but he quickly schooled his expression, turning his attention to the children. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice rough with cold and something deeper. "Who's ready for presents?" The gifts were modest. New books for Sarah and Jacob, a wooden horse that Ethan had carved for Emma, knitted scarves that Maggie had made for everyone. But the children's joy was outsized to the simplicity of the offerings, and watching them exclaim over each small treasure, Maggie felt her throat tighten. This was what she'd traveled west for. Not marriage to a stranger who'd rejected her sight unseen, but this warm kitchen full of laughter. These children who looked at her like she hung the moon. This man who'd kissed her like she was precious. "Miss Maggie, you didn't open yours," Emma said, tugging at her skirt. Maggie looked down to find a small package she hadn't noticed, wrapped in fabric and tied with a ribbon that looked suspiciously like it had come from Sarah's sewing basket. "That's from all of us," Sarah said quietly. "We made it together." Inside was a handkerchief, painstakingly embroidered with her initials and slightly crooked stitches. The work was clearly collaborative, Sarah's neat stitching mixed with Emma's enthusiastic but uneven attempts, Jacob's careful border work. beautiful, Maggie whispered, tears spilling over before she could stop them. Thank you. All of you. Emma climbed into her lap, patting her face with small hands. Don't cry, Miss Maggie. We love you. The words, spoken with a 5-year-old's casual certainty, hit Maggie like a physical blow. She looked up to find Ethan watching her, his expression tender and fierce at once. We do, he said softly. All of us. The moment was broken by Jacob demanding they play the new card game Maggie had taught them, and the morning dissolved into laughter and competition and the kind of easy joy that Maggie had never experienced in her proper Boston Christmases. But throughout it all, she felt the weight of Ethan's gaze, the unspoken question hanging between them. What happens now? That night, after the children were finally settled, exhausted from excitement and too many sweets, Maggie found herself once again by the fire with Ethan. But this time, he took her hand immediately, threading his fingers through hers with a naturalness that suggested he'd been thinking about it all day. I need to be honest with you, he said without preamble, about what I want, what I'm hoping for. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. All right. I didn't plan on this. When I hired you, I was thinking about the children, about giving them some stability and education. I wasn't thinking about myself, about what I needed. Ethan paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But somewhere between that first day and now, you became essential. Not just to them, but to me. Ethan, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. I know it's only been 2 months. I know it's too soon by any reasonable measure. But grief has a way of clarifying what matters. Life is short and brutal and uncertain, and when you find something real, something worth holding on to, you don't let it slip away because the timing isn't perfect. Maggie stared at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused from ranch work, hers rough now from frontier life, but still pale in comparison. What are you saying? I'm saying I want you to stay, not as the governess, not as hired help. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her shiver. As my wife, if you'll have me. As a mother to my children and a partner in this life I'm building. The proposal hung in the air between them, more precious than any jeweled ring or flowery declaration. Maggie felt tears building again, but this time they weren't born of sadness. I'm not the woman you plan to marry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not small or delicate or graceful. You're brave. Ethan cut her off, his intensity almost frightening. You're kind and intelligent and patient. You threw yourself between my daughter and a train without hesitating. You've loved my children through their grief and helped them find joy again. You've brought warmth back to a house that was dying from cold. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I don't care about small or delicate. I care about strength and goodness and a heart big enough to hold all the broken pieces we brought to you. But what if it's not enough? The fear that had lived in Maggie's chest her entire adult life came spilling out. What if you wake up one day and realize you settled, that you could have had someone better, someone who fits what a rancher's wife should be? Anna was a large woman, Ethan said quietly, tall and strong and built for hard work. When we married, people made comments, said I should have found someone more refined, more feminine, said she'd never last through a Wyoming winter. His voice turned fierce. She lasted 15 years, bore me 3 children, helped me build this ranch from nothing, and loved me so completely that losing her nearly destroyed me. And never once, not once, did I think I'd settled. He pulled Maggie closer, his forehead resting against hers. I'm not asking you to replace her. That's not possible. But I'm asking you to build something new with me, something that honors what we've both lost while creating space for what we've found. Maggie closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She thought about the telegram that had shattered her on that train platform 2 months ago, about standing alone with nowhere to go and no one to want her. She thought about how that moment of complete devastation had led her here, to this house, these children, this man who saw her worth when the whole world had told her she had none. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Ethan's kiss was different this time, not tentative or questioning, but claiming, celebrating, sealing a promise that went deeper than words. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, He was smiling in a way that transformed his whole face. "We should tell the children," he said. "Tomorrow." Maggie wasn't ready to share this yet, wasn't ready for anything to intrude on the fragile, perfect bubble they'd created. "Let me have you to myself for just a little longer." So they sat by the fire until the logs burned to embers, talking about the future in soft voices. Ethan spoke of his plans for the ranch, of expanding the herd come spring, of teaching Jacob to ride and helping Sarah develop her obvious talent for mathematics. Maggie talked about lessons she wanted to introduce, books she'd read to the children, small improvements to the house that would make their lives easier. They were practical conversations, the kind any frontier couple might have. But beneath the practicality ran a current of something deeper, the recognition that they were building a life together, brick by brick, word by word. When Maggie finally stood to retire, Ethan caught her hand one more time. "I know you've been hurt," he said softly. "I know trusting me isn't easy. But I promise you, Maggie, I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice, that you're wanted, that you're loved." Maggie bent and kissed him gently, pouring every ounce of hope and fear and desperate longing into it. "I believe you," she whispered against his lips. "I'm choosing to believe you." The next morning, they gathered the children at the kitchen table. Emma climbed immediately into Maggie's lap, as had become her habit. Jacob sat swinging his legs, curiosity bright in his eyes. Sarah was the most reserved, her 12-year-old face carefully neutral as she watched her father. "We have something to tell you," Ethan began. "Something important." "Are we moving?" Jacob asked immediately. Tommy Henderson's family moved to Montana, and he said, "We're not moving." Ethan smiled. "Just the opposite. I've asked Miss Maggie to stay permanently, as my wife, as your new mother." The silence that followed felt endless. Emma's small body had gone very still in Maggie's arms. Jacob's eyes were wide with surprise. But it was Sarah's reaction that made Maggie's stomach knot with anxiety. The girl's face had gone pale, her hands clenched in her lap. "You want to replace Mama?" Sarah said, her voice shaking. "No." Ethan's response was immediate and firm. "Never. Your mother was irreplaceable. But she's gone, Sarah, and this family needs..." "Needs what? Someone to cook and clean?" Sarah stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. "I can do that. I have been doing that. You don't need to marry someone just to..." "Sarah." Maggie's voice was gentle, but carried enough authority to stop the girl's tirade. "Come here, please." Sarah hesitated, then came around the table. Maggie shifted Emma to make room, then took Sarah's cold hands in hers. "I know you've been carrying this household on your shoulders since your mother died," Maggie said quietly. "I've watched you trying to be the woman of the house at 12 years old, cooking, cleaning, caring for your siblings, managing things no child should have to manage, and you've done a remarkable job." "Then why?" "Because you shouldn't have to." Maggie squeezed Sarah's hands. "You should get to be 12. You should get to study your mathematics and read your books and have time to grieve your mother without feeling like the weight of this family rests on you alone." "But if you marry Papa, you'll be our mother." Sarah's voice broke. "And I don't want another mother. I want my real one." "I know." Maggie pulled Sarah closer, wrapping an arm around her thin shoulders while keeping Emma secure in her lap. "And nothing about me being here changes how much your mother loved you or how much you loved her. I'm not trying to erase her or replace her. I'm just trying to help carry the weight she left behind." "Your mother will always be your mother," Ethan added, his voice rough with emotion. "Always. But she would want you taken care of. She would want all of you to have someone who loves you and looks after you. And I believe, she would approve of Maggie." Sarah was crying in earnest now, great gulping sobs that shook her entire frame. Maggie held her, rocking slightly, letting the girl release the grief and fear and exhaustion she'd been holding inside for 18 months. "I miss her so much," Sarah sobbed. "Every day I miss her." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Emma had started crying too, though Maggie suspected she was responding more to Sarah's distress than expressing her own feelings. Jacob sat frozen at the table, his young face struggling to process the emotional storm surrounding him. They stayed like that for a long time, Maggie holding both girls while Ethan moved to sit beside Jacob, his hand on his son's shoulder. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Will you make us call you Mama?" she asked, her voice small. "Absolutely not," Maggie said firmly. "You can call me Miss Maggie, or just Maggie, or nothing at all if you prefer. Your mama was your mama. I'm just Maggie." Something in Sarah's expression shifted, tension easing fractionally. "And you won't try to change everything, make it different from how Mama did things?" "Some things will have to be different," Maggie said honestly. "I'm not your mother. I do things my own way. But I promise to honor her memory and listen when you tell me how she would have handled something. Fair?" Sarah considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair. What about you two?" Ethan asked Jacob and Emma. "How do you feel about this?" Jacob shrugged with a 7-year-old's resilience. "I like Miss Maggie. She teaches good and she doesn't yell when I spill things." Emma burrowed deeper into Maggie's arms. "Will you still sleep in your room, or will you sleep in Papa's room like Mama did?" The question, asked with innocent directness, made both Maggie and Ethan flush, but Maggie answered honestly. "After we're married, I'll share your Papa's room. That's what married people do." "Okay." Emma seemed satisfied with this. "And you won't go away like Mama did? You won't get sick and die?" The fear beneath the question broke Maggie's heart. "I can't promise I'll never get sick, Emma. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise that I'm not planning to go anywhere. I'm choosing to stay here with all of you for as long as I possibly can." "Then I think it's good," Emma decided. "You make Papa smile again. He stopped smiling after Mama died, but now he smiles at you." Ethan's eyes met Maggie's across the table, and she saw the same stunned gratitude she felt reflected in his gaze. They'd expected resistance, arguments, possibly outright rebellion. Instead, the children were accepting this change with a resilience that spoke to both their strength and their desperate need for stability. "So we're doing this?" Sarah asked, looking between her father and Maggie. "We're really becoming a family?" "We already are a family," Ethan said gently. "This just makes it official." They decided to marry in early February, giving the children time to adjust to the idea and Maggie time to sew a simple dress appropriate for a frontier wedding. She worked on it in the evenings after the children were asleep, her fingers moving through fabric that was nothing like the elaborate gown she'd once imagined wearing when she'd thought she was traveling west to marry Howard Garrett. That wedding dress, the one she'd packed so carefully in Boston, embroidered with delicate flowers and edged in lace she couldn't really afford, still sat folded in her trunk. She'd thought about using the fabric for her new dress, but every time she touched it, she felt the weight of that rejection, that telegram telling her she wasn't wanted. She couldn't marry Ethan in a dress meant for a man who'd thrown her away. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked one evening, catching her staring at the half-finished dress in her lap. "The past," Maggie admitted. "And how strange it is that the worst day of my life led to the best thing that's ever happened to me." Ethan crossed to her chair, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "I think about that too. About how Anna dying destroyed me, but eventually led me to you. It feels wrong to be grateful for anything that came from losing her. But you can be grateful anyway," Maggie said softly. "You can miss what you lost and still appreciate what you found. Those things don't cancel each other out." "No." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "They don't." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and adjustment. Sarah remained reserved but no longer hostile, watching Maggie with careful assessment as if waiting to see if she'd keep her promises. Jacob adapted with easy acceptance, already calling Maggie almost Mama, in a way that made her heart clench. Emma grew more attached by the day, following Maggie everywhere and insisting on sleeping in Maggie's room more nights than not. And Ethan courted her properly despite their engagement, stealing moments when the children weren't watching to kiss her, hold her, whisper promises about their future together. His touch became familiar, welcome, something Maggie found herself craving during the long days when ranch work kept them apart. But beneath the happiness and anticipation, fear still lived in Maggie's chest. Fear that this was too good to last. Fear that Ethan would wake up one day and see her clearly, see the soft stomach, the wide hips, the flesh that gathered at her arms and chin, and regret his choice. Fear that she was fooling herself, that no man could truly want her the way Ethan claimed to. The fear came to a head 3 weeks before the wedding. Maggie was washing dishes after supper while Ethan read to the children in the main room. Through the doorway, she could hear Jacob's excited questions about the story, Emma's delighted giggles, Sarah's rare smile in her voice, the sounds of family, of home, of everything she'd ever wanted. But as she looked down at her hands in the soapy water, she saw them as they truly were, soft and thick-fingered, nothing like the delicate hands that graced the ladies' magazine she'd read in Boston. Hands that matched the body they belonged to, the body that had kept her unmarried and unwanted for 24 years. What was Ethan thinking, marrying her? What was she thinking, accepting? "Miss Maggie?" Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Papa wants to know if you'll come sit with us." "In a moment." Maggie forced a smile. "I just need to finish here." But Sarah didn't leave. Instead, she came closer, her young face serious. "Are you having second thoughts?" The perceptiveness of the question made Maggie's hand still in the dishwater. "What makes you ask that? You've been quiet all week, and you get this look sometimes, like you're afraid of something." Sarah paused. "Like you're waiting for something bad to happen." Maggie dried her hand slowly, buying time to form an answer that was honest without burdening a 12-year-old with her adult fears. "I'm not used to happiness," she said finally. "I'm not used to being wanted. So sometimes it's hard to believe this is real, that it's going to last." "Papa wants you," Sarah said firmly. "I can tell. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama, like you're the center of everything. Your father is a good man who sees the best in people, but sometimes you think he's wrong about you." Sarah crossed her arms, looking suddenly much older than 12. "You think you're not good enough, that you're not pretty enough, or thin enough, or whatever enough." Maggie stared at her. "Sarah, I hear the way you talk about yourself when you think nobody's listening, about being too big, too plain, about that man who didn't want to marry you." Sarah's voice was fierce now. "But you're wrong. You're not to anything. You're exactly right." Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know you saved Emma's life. I know you've been patient with all of us, even when we were difficult. I know you've made this house feel like a home again, instead of just a place where we're surviving." Sarah moved closer, her small hand finding Maggie's. "I know my papa deserves to be happy after everything he's lost. And I know you make him happy. But what if I can't be what he needs?" The fear spilled out despite Maggie's attempt to contain it. "What if I'm not strong enough, not capable enough? What if you stop thinking you have to be perfect and just let yourself be loved?" Sarah interrupted. Her eyes, so like her father's, held a wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone her age. "Mama used to say that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest and showing up even when it's hard. You do that every day, Miss Maggie. Every single day." Maggie pulled Sarah into a fierce hug, this child woman who'd lost her mother too young and was somehow finding strength to offer comfort instead of seeking it. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had good teachers." Sarah hugged back, then pulled away with a watery smile. "Now come sit with us before Papa sends Jacob to investigate." That night, after the children were asleep, Maggie told Ethan about her conversation with Sarah. They were in their usual spots by the fire, close enough to touch but maintaining the propriety that wouldn't be necessary much longer. "She's right, you know," Ethan said when Maggie finished. "About you being exactly right." "Ethan, no, listen to me." He took both her hands in his grip firm and warm. "I'm not marrying you because I feel obligated or because the children need a mother or because you are conveniently available. I'm marrying you because in 2 months you've become essential to my happiness. Because I've fallen in love with your kindness, your strength, your intelligence, your capacity to love broken things back to wholeness. But physically, you're beautiful." Ethan's voice was intense, brooking no argument. "You have a lovely face, soft curves that make me want to hold you close, strong arms that can comfort a child and knead bread with equal skill. When I look at you, I see a woman who's perfectly suited for frontier life, a woman built to last." Maggie wanted to protest, to point out all the ways she didn't match society's standards of beauty, but Ethan's eyes held such utter conviction that the words died in her throat. I see you, Maggie, he continued. Not some idealized version, not who you think you should be. I see you exactly as you are, and I want you, all of you, for always. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and claiming, his hands coming up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maggie pressed her forehead to his. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm terrified of believing this and having it turn out to be a dream. Then let me spend every day proving it's real. Ethan's thumb traced her cheekbone. Let me love you until you can't doubt it anymore, however long that takes. That might take a very long time. Good. His smile was soft in the firelight. I'm planning on forever anyway. The wedding took place on a cold February morning, with the pastor from Cheyenne traveling out to perform the ceremony in the Rowlands' main room. Maggie wore her new dress, simple blue calico with careful stitching, and the cameo brooch Ethan had given her at Christmas. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and for once she looked in the mirror and didn't flinch at what she saw. She looked like a frontier bride, strong, practical, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The ceremony itself was brief and practical, witnessed by the children and 2 neighboring ranchers Ethan had invited. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such gentle reverence that Maggie felt tears threaten. I love you, he whispered against her lips, quiet enough that only she could hear. My wife. The words settled warm in Maggie's chest, feeling more precious than any jeweled ring or elaborate celebration. This was real. This man, this life, this family, all of it was real and hers. The small gathering shared a wedding meal that Maggie and Sarah had prepared together. Roast chicken, potatoes, biscuits, and a cake that Emma had helped frost with enthusiastic, if uneven, results. The children were more relaxed than Maggie had dared hope, laughing and celebrating without the shadow of grief that had haunted them at Christmas. When the neighbors finally left and the dishes were washed and the children settled in bed, Maggie found herself alone with Ethan for the first time as his wife. Her husband stood by their bedroom door, the room that had been his and Anna's, that was now his and Maggie's, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Having second thoughts? She asked, trying for lightness despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Never. Ethan crossed to her, taking her hands. But I want you to know, there's no rush. We can take this as slowly as you need. I'm not expecting... Maggie kissed him, cutting off his careful offer with a boldness that surprised them both. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened with desire barely held in check. I'm not fragile, she said softly, and I'm not afraid. Not anymore. Maggie, I choose this. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. I choose you. I choose us. And I'm done letting fear steal my joy. Ethan's smile was brilliant in the lamplight. Then come to bed, wife. Let me show you exactly how much I've been wanting you. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Ethan made good on every promise he'd offered. He touched her with reverence and passion, worshiping every curve and soft place she'd spent her life hating. He whispered her name like a prayer, told her she was beautiful until she almost believed it, loved her with such thoroughness that she finally understood the difference between being used and being cherished. And when they finally lay together in the aftermath, Maggie's head on Ethan's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she felt something shift and settle in her heart. The fear didn't disappear completely. She suspected it might never fully leave, but it no longer owned her. She was Maggie Rowland now, wife, mother, partner in building a life that mattered. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. What are you thinking? Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. That I'm grateful, Maggie whispered, for that telegram, for being stranded, for Emma running toward those tracks, for every terrible thing that led me here to you. Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair. I'm grateful too, for second chances and stubborn women who throw themselves at moving children, and stubborn men who see worth where others see failure. No failure. Ethan's arms tightened around her. Just a woman who was waiting for someone with sense enough to recognize treasure when he found it. Maggie smiled in the darkness, letting herself believe him, letting herself rest in the security of being chosen, being wanted, being loved exactly as she was. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang its endless song, but inside, wrapped in her husband's arms with her children sleeping safely nearby, Maggie finally felt at home. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, the snow clinging stubbornly to the valleys well into March before finally surrendering to tentative warmth. Maggie stood at the kitchen window watching the first green shoots push through the mud, her hands resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach, while she contemplated the secret she'd been carrying for the past 2 weeks. She was pregnant. The realization had come gradually, the missed monthly courses, the subtle queasiness that struck most mornings, the exhaustion that pulled at her despite a full night's sleep. She'd suspected for days before finally admitting the truth to herself, and even then, she'd kept it quiet, savoring the knowledge alone before sharing it with Ethan. Part of her hesitation was practical. They'd been married only 6 weeks. The children were still adjusting to having her as a permanent fixture in their lives, rather than just the governess. Adding a baby to the mix so soon felt like asking them to accept too much change too quickly. But beneath the practical concerns lived a deeper fear, one that made Maggie's throat tighten whenever she let herself acknowledge it. What if her body, which had always been wrong in every other way, couldn't do this? What if she failed at the one thing women were supposedly built for? What if she lost the baby, or worse, died in childbirth like so many frontier women did, leaving Ethan and the children to grieve another loss? "Miss Maggie, you're doing it again." Maggie turned to find Sarah watching her from the table where she was supposed to be working on her geography lesson. The girl's expression was knowing beyond her 12 years. "Doing what?" Maggie asked, forcing a smile. "Worrying about something you won't talk about." Sarah set down her pencil. "You've been strange for days, quiet. Papa's noticed too." "I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking." "About the baby?" The question, delivered with Sarah's characteristic directness, made Maggie's hands tighten on the windowsill. "How did you—" "I'm not a child," Sarah said, though of course she was. "I've seen pregnant women before. And you've been tired all the time, and you didn't eat any bacon this morning even though it's your favorite, and yesterday you cried during Jacob's reading lesson for no reason." Maggie's eyes burned with the threatened tears that seemed always ready to spill lately. "I haven't told your father yet." "Why not?" Sarah's tone held no judgment, just genuine curiosity. "He'll be happy. He always wanted more children, but Mama couldn't have any more after the twins." The information settled heavy in Maggie's chest. Another way she was walking in Anna Rowland's footsteps, filling spaces left empty by a woman she'd never met, but whose absence shaped everything. "I'm scared," Maggie admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. "What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not strong enough?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying Maggie with those serious dark eyes. Then she stood and crossed to the window, her small hand finding Maggie's. "Mama was strong," she said softly, "the strongest person I knew. And she still died from a fever that took her in 3 days. Being strong doesn't protect you from bad things happening." She squeezed Maggie's fingers. "But being scared doesn't protect you either. It just makes you miss the good parts while you're waiting for the bad." The wisdom in the statement, so profound coming from a 12-year-old who'd lost her mother, made Maggie pull Sarah into a fierce hug. "When did you become so wise?" she whispered. "I had a good teacher." Sarah hugged back, then pulled away with a watery smile. "You should tell Papa. He deserves to know, and he'll want to know." That evening, after the children were settled and the house was quiet, Maggie found Ethan in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting with the smile he reserved just for her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, setting aside the brush he'd been using on the horse. "Couldn't rest until I talked to you." Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. "I have something to tell you." Ethan's expression shifted immediately to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think anything's wrong." She took a breath, forcing the words out before fear could stop them. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. We're going to have a baby." The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes locked on hers, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and something deeper that Maggie couldn't name. Then he was moving, closing the distance between them and pulling her into his arms with such fierce tenderness that she gasped. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "Maggie, a baby. You're happy?" Her voice came out small, muffled against his chest. "Happy?" Ethan pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. I'm more grateful than I have words for." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "You've given me so much already. Love, partnership, joy. I didn't think I'd feel again. And now this. A child with you." The tears Maggie had been fighting finally spilled over. "I'm scared it won't work, that something will go wrong, that I'll fail at this like I've failed at everything else." "You haven't failed at anything," Ethan said fiercely. "And you won't fail at this either. We'll get through it together, whatever comes." "But what if—" "No." He kissed her again, silencing her fears with the warmth of his mouth. "No what ifs. Just now. Just this moment, this blessing, this life we're building together." His hand moved to rest gently on her stomach. "This baby is already loved, Maggie, already wanted. Whatever happens, that won't change." She let herself believe him, let herself sink into his certainty when her own was so fragile. They stood together in the quiet barn, the mare shuffling in her stall behind them, and Maggie felt something shift and settle. The fear didn't disappear, but it made room for hope. The next morning at breakfast, Ethan announced the news to the children with a pride that made Maggie's chest tight. Jacob's reaction was immediate enthusiasm, his 7-year-old mind already planning all the things he'd teach the new baby. Emma clapped her hands with delight, declaring that she wanted a sister so she wouldn't be outnumbered anymore. Sarah's response was quieter, but no less genuine. She met Maggie's eyes across the table and smiled, a real smile, warm and accepting and utterly without reservation. "Congratulations," she said simply, "both of you." The months that followed brought changes both subtle and profound. Maggie's body, which she'd spent her whole life struggling against, now had a purpose beyond mere existence. Her softness became protective padding for the child growing inside her. Her wide hips would make room for birth. Her ample chest would provide nourishment. Every curve that had marked her as unwanted in Boston society became evidence of capability on the Wyoming frontier. Ethan seemed to find her more beautiful with each passing week. He'd touch her expanding belly with reverent hands, feeling for the baby's movements, whispering to their child through her skin. At night, he'd hold her carefully, as if she might break, though Maggie felt stronger than she ever had. "I'm not fragile," she told him one evening when his touch was particularly gentle. "I know." His hand splayed across her stomach where their baby rolled and kicked. "But you're carrying something precious. I can't help wanting to protect you both." "Then protect us by letting me be strong," Maggie said. "I need to know I can do this, that I'm capable." Ethan studied her face in the lamplight, then nodded slowly. "You're the strongest person I know, Maggie Rowland. I'll try to remember that." But strength was tested in unexpected ways. In late May, a letter arrived from Boston, forwarded from the boarding house where Maggie had planned to stay when she'd first arrived in Cheyenne. The handwriting was her aunt's, precise and judgmental, even in the formation of letters. Maggie stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it, dread pooling in her stomach. Her aunt hadn't written once in the 6 months since Maggie had left Boston. The silence had been a relief, honestly, one less voice telling her she wasn't enough. The letter was brief and cutting in the way only family could manage. Her aunt had heard through mutual acquaintances that Maggie had married a rancher in Wyoming. She hoped Maggie was happy, though she doubted any man would take on someone of Maggie's size and temperament without desperate circumstances forcing his hand. She trusted Maggie was at least making herself useful to her new husband, as that was all someone in her position could hope to offer. The words landed like physical blows, each one carefully aimed to wound. Maggie read the letter twice, then a third time, feeling the old shame rising up to choke her. Desperate circumstances, making herself useful, all she could hope to offer. "What's that?" Maggie looked up to find Ethan in the doorway, dust from the fields coating his clothes, and exhaustion lining his face. She should have hidden the letter, should have protected him from her aunt's poison. Instead, she handed it to him silently, watching his expression darken as he read. "This is from your aunt?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "She means well," Maggie said automatically, though she didn't believe it. "She means to hurt you." Ethan crumpled the letter in his fist. "To make you doubt yourself, and this marriage, and your worth. That's not meaning well, Maggie. That's cruelty." "She's right, though." The words escaped before Maggie could stop them. "You did marry me out of desperate circumstances. You needed help with the children, and I was there, and—" "Stop." Ethan crossed to her chair, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me very carefully. I married you because I fell in love with you, not because you were convenient, not because I was desperate, because you're brave and kind and strong, and you make me want to be better than I am. But if I hadn't saved Emma, if you hadn't saved Emma, I would have met you some other way and fallen just as hard," Ethan interrupted. "Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe I would have been too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. But I would have found you, Maggie, because you're exactly who I needed, even when I didn't know I needed anyone." Maggie wanted to believe him. She did believe him, in the deep places where truth lived beyond the reach of old wounds. But her aunt's words had reopened scars she'd thought were healing. "She's always made me feel like I was wrong," she whispered. "Too much of everything bad, not enough of anything good. And sometimes I still hear her voice in my head telling me I don't deserve this, that I'm fooling myself." "Then we need to make new voices." Ethan took her hands, his grip firm and anchoring. "Voices that tell you the truth, that you're loved, that you're wanted, that you're enough exactly as you are." He pulled her into his arms, and Maggie let herself rest against his strength, feeling the baby kick between them as if in agreement. They stayed like that until the shadows lengthened and Sarah called them for supper. And when Maggie finally pulled away, she felt steadier. That night, Ethan burned her aunt's letter in the fireplace, and they watched the poisonous words turn to ash together. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made everything shimmer and slow. Maggie's pregnancy advanced into its final months, her belly growing round and heavy, her movements becoming careful and deliberate. The children adapted to her changing body with easy acceptance. Emma liked to press her ear to Maggie's stomach and listen for the baby. Jacob treated her with exaggerated care, as if she might topple over at any moment, and Sarah quietly took over more of the household tasks without being asked. Ethan hired a woman from town to help with the heavier work, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who'd raised 6 children of her own and knew frontier childbirth in all its risks and realities. She arrived twice a week, bringing practical advice and gentle reassurance that eased some of Maggie's fears. "You're built strong," Mrs. Patterson told her during one visit, her experienced hands examining Maggie's belly with professional efficiency. "Wide hips, good health, baby positioned well. You'll do fine when the time comes." "How can you be sure?" Maggie asked. "I can't. Nobody can." Mrs. Patterson's honesty was oddly comforting. "Childbirth is dangerous, especially out here without doctors nearby. But worrying about it won't change what happens. Best you can do is prepare yourself, trust your body, and let the people who love you help when the time comes." The practical wisdom helped more than platitudes would have. Maggie stopped fighting her fears and instead channeled them into preparation. She and Sarah worked together to prepare a corner of the bedroom for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and soft blankets from fabric ordered from the catalog. Emma contributed enthusiastically, if somewhat crookedly, sewn items. Even Jacob helped, carving a small rattle under Ethan's supervision. The work brought them together in new ways, the children's excitement about the coming baby gradually erasing the last lingering shadows of their mother's death. They still missed Anna. Maggie saw it in small moments, heard it in casual references to when Mama was alive. But the grief was gentler now, more memory than open wound. "Do you think Mama would be happy about the baby?" Emma asked one evening while Maggie braided her hair for bed. The question caught Maggie off guard. "I think she would," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I feel sad that she's not here to meet them." Emma's voice was small. "But then I feel bad for being sad, because you're here and you're having the baby, and I love you too." Maggie's hand stilled in Emma's hair. "Oh, sweetheart, you can love both of us. Missing your mama doesn't mean you love me less. And loving me doesn't mean you miss her less. People's hearts are big enough to hold all kinds of love at once. Really? Really? Maggie turned Emma around, cupping the little girl's face in her hands. Your mama will always be your mama. Nothing changes that. And I believe, she'd be glad you have someone else to love you too. Because that's what good mothers want for their children, for them to be loved and safe and happy. Emma threw her arms around Maggie's neck, squeezing tight. I'm glad you came to the train station that day, she whispered, even if it was scary. Me too, baby girl, me too. But the peace Maggie had built, fragile as it was, shattered one hot afternoon in late July. She was in the garden pulling weeds, moving slowly in deference to her 8 months pregnant belly, when a wagon rolled up the drive. A woman climbed down, elegant despite the dust of travel, her dress expensive and carefully maintained, her bearing that of someone accustomed to getting her way. Maggie struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her lower back, the other shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Can I help you? She called. The woman's eyes swept over Maggie with undisguised assessment, lingering on her swollen belly, her work-roughened hands, her simple cotton dress. The judgment in that gaze was immediate and cutting. I'm looking for Ethan Rowland, the woman said. Her voice was cultured, Eastern, utterly out of place on a Wyoming ranch. I was told this was his property. It is. He's out with the cattle, but he should be back within the hour. You're welcome to wait inside where it's cooler. The woman's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. How gracious. And you are? Margaret Rowland, Ethan's wife. The woman's eyebrows rose. His wife? How unexpected. She moved closer, her gaze calculating. I'm Charlotte Garrett. Perhaps my brother mentioned me in his letters. The name hit Maggie like a physical blow. Garrett. Howard Garrett, the rancher who'd advertised for a bride, who'd summoned her west only to send a telegram canceling their arrangement. Howard Garrett, whose rejection had left her stranded on that train platform where everything had changed. Your brother, Maggie repeated faintly. Yes. Howard wrote that he'd arranged for a mail-order bride from Boston, but when she arrived, she wasn't suitable. Charlotte's smile turned sharp. Imagine my surprise to learn that same unsuitable woman somehow managed to trap a different rancher into marriage within months of being rejected. The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Maggie felt the old shame rising, the familiar voice that said she wasn't good enough, wasn't wanted, had somehow tricked Ethan into caring for her. I didn't trap anyone, she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. Ethan proposed of his own free will. Did he? Charlotte circled Maggie slowly, her gaze predatory. Or did you manipulate a grieving widower who needed help with his children? Play on his desperation until he felt obligated to make an honest woman of you? That's not what happened, isn't it? You show up on the frontier with nowhere else to go, insert yourself into his household, make yourself indispensable to his children. Charlotte gestured at Maggie's belly. And now you're carrying his child, ensuring he can never be rid of you even if he wanted to be. Each word was a knife finding soft places, old wounds Maggie thought had healed. She tried to respond, to defend herself, but her throat had closed around the words. Miss Garrett, you need to leave. Maggie turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, her young face set in hard lines. Behind her, Jacob and Emma huddled close, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. This is an adult conversation, Charlotte said dismissively. This is our home, and you're upsetting my mother. Sarah's voice didn't waver. So you need to leave now before my father gets back and makes you. The word mother landed in Maggie's chest with unexpected weight. Sarah had never called her that before, had stuck firmly to Miss Maggie despite the marriage. But she'd said it now, claiming Maggie publicly as family in the face of this stranger's cruelty. Charlotte's expression hardened. Your mother is dead, child. This woman is just what I chose to marry. Ethan's voice cut across the yard, hard and cold in a way Maggie had never heard. He strode toward them from the barn, his face set in furious lines. Ethan! Charlotte's demeanor shifted immediately, softening into something that might have been meant as appealing. I apologize for the confusion. I came to discuss a business matter regarding the fence line between your property and Howard's, and I'm afraid I've accidentally upset your household." "You came to cause trouble," Ethan said flatly. He moved to stand beside Maggie, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. "I don't know what your brother told you, but I can guess. And I'll tell you the same thing I'd tell him if he had the courage to come himself. My wife is worth 10 of any woman who'd stand in someone's garden and sling poison at them." "Your wife is pregnant with a child conceived barely weeks after your marriage," Charlotte said, her voice dripping false concern. "Surely you can see how that looks, how people might question what? Whether I wanted her? Whether I love her?" Ethan's laugh was harsh. "The only thing I question is why the Garrett family seems determined to reject the best thing that ever could have happened to them. Your brother turned down a woman who's brave, kind, intelligent, and strong because she didn't meet his shallow standards. That's his loss and my blessing." Charlotte's composed mask slipped, showing genuine surprise beneath. "You actually care for her." "I love her." Ethan pulled Maggie closer, his arm around her shoulders protective and claiming at once, "I fell in love with her the day she saved my daughter's life without thinking twice about her own safety. I've loved her more every day since, and the fact that she's carrying my child, our child, is the greatest gift I could ask for. But surely you can see, I can see that you need to leave my property immediately." Ethan's voice was ice. "And you can tell your brother that if he or anyone from his family sets foot on my land again, they'll regret it." Charlotte stood frozen for a long moment, her calculated cruelty finally meeting something it couldn't manipulate or wound. Then she turned on her heel and climbed back into her wagon, driving away without another word. The silence she left behind felt heavy and fragile. Ethan guided Maggie toward the house, his hand steady on her back, while Sarah shepherded the younger children inside. Once they were alone in the bedroom, Maggie finally let the tears come. "She's right," she sobbed against Ethan's chest. "I did insert myself into your life. I did make myself indispensable. I did trap you." "Stop." Ethan's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Stop letting cruel people define your worth. You didn't trap me. You saved my daughter, accepted a job I offered, and loved my family so completely that I couldn't help falling in love with you back. There's no manipulation in that. No scheme, just two broken people finding wholeness together." "But what if people think I don't care what people think?" His intensity was almost frightening. "I care what's true. And the truth is that you're my wife, the mother of my children, the woman I chose to spend my life with. Anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell." Maggie hiccuped a laugh through her tears. "That's not very Christian of you." "Good thing I'm not feeling particularly Christian right now." Ethan kissed her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks, finally her mouth with a gentleness that undid her all over again. "I'm feeling protective and grateful, and so completely in love with you that I can't see straight. Even though I'm huge and emotional, and especially because you're carrying our child and still strong enough to stand in that garden and face down someone trying to destroy you." His hand moved to her belly, feeling the baby's response to his touch. "You're magnificent, Maggie. I don't know how to make you see that." "Keep telling me," she whispered. "Even when I don't believe it. Especially when I don't believe it. Just keep telling me until it sticks." "Every day," Ethan promised. "For the rest of our lives." That night, long after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Maggie lay awake beside her husband thinking about Charlotte Garrett's words. About being unsuitable, about trapping Ethan, about not deserving the life she'd built. The old voices were loud again, drowning out the newer, kinder ones that told her she mattered. But then the baby moved inside her, a rolling kick that pressed against Ethan's hand where it rested on her belly, even in sleep. And Maggie thought about Sarah calling her mother, about Emma's arms around her neck, about Jacob's enthusiasm and Ethan's fierce love. She thought about the life growing inside her, the family she'd built from ruins and rejection. Maybe she wasn't suitable by Charlotte Garrett's standards. Maybe she'd never be small or delicate or classically beautiful. But she was loved. She was wanted. She was enough. And slowly, painfully, Maggie was beginning to believe it. The pains started 3 weeks later in the still darkness before dawn when the August heat hadn't yet pressed down on the valley. Maggie woke to a tightening across her belly that stole her breath, different from the practice contractions she'd been feeling for weeks. This was purposeful, insistent, the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. She lay still for a moment, one hand on her stomach, feeling the hardness pass and then ease. Beside her, Ethan slept deeply, exhausted from a week of brutal work preparing for winter. She should wake him. She knew she should, but some part of her wanted to hold this knowledge close for just a little longer, these last moments before everything changed. The second contraction came 15 minutes later, strong enough that she had to bite her lip to stay quiet. When it passed, she carefully slid from the bed and dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, moving as quietly as her heavy body would allow. The house was still silent as she made her way to the kitchen. Through the window, she could see the first gray hints of morning touching the mountains. It would be a beautiful day, she thought, a good day to bring a child into the world, if there was such a thing. She was putting coffee on when Sarah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her nightgown with sleep-tangled hair. "It's time, isn't it?" the girl asked quietly. Maggie didn't bother denying it. "How did you know?" "The way you're moving, the way you're breathing." Sarah crossed to her, suddenly looking much older than 12. Mama was the same way when the twins came. She was up before everyone, cleaning the house like she could control what was about to happen if she just got everything in order first. The comparison to Anna shouldn't have comforted Maggie, but somehow it did. She wasn't alone in this fear, this instinct to prepare for the unprepared. "I should wake your father," Maggie said. "Not yet." Sarah surprised her by taking the coffee pot and finishing the task herself. "Sit down. Rest while you can. I'll wake Papa when the pains get closer together." Maggie wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but another contraction was building and she needed all her focus to breathe through it. Sarah watched with knowing eyes, waiting until it passed before speaking again. "Are you scared?" The question, asked so directly, deserved an honest answer. "Terrified." Mama was too. She told me the night before the twins came that she was more afraid of childbirth than anything else in her whole life. Sarah poured coffee with steady hands. But she said being scared didn't mean she couldn't do it, just meant it mattered enough to be afraid of. "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was. And so are you." Sarah set the coffee in front of Maggie, then did something she rarely did. She leaned down and kissed Maggie's cheek. "You're going to be fine. And if you're not, we'll get through it together. That's what families do." By the time Ethan emerged from the bedroom an hour later, the contractions were coming every 10 minutes, and Maggie was struggling to hide the pain from her face. He took one look at her and went pale. "How long?" he demanded. "Since before dawn. Sarah's been timing them." Ethan turned to his daughter with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "You should have woken me immediately." "Mama always said the early part was for the woman to manage herself," Sarah said calmly. "The men come in useful later when the real work starts." Despite the pain building in her back, Maggie laughed. "She's right, and I needed the quiet time, but I need you now." The words seemed to steady Ethan. He crossed to her, taking her hands, his grip warm and anchoring. "What do you need me to do?" "Send Jacob to fetch Mrs. Patterson. Tell her it's time, and then—" Another contraction stole her words, stronger than the ones before, and she gripped Ethan's hands hard enough to hurt. He didn't flinch, just held her through it, his voice low and steady in her ear. "Breathe, love, just breathe. I've got you." The morning passed in a haze of increasing pain and decreasing time between contractions. Mrs. Patterson arrived within 2 hours, took one look at Maggie, and immediately took charge with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen this dozens of times before. "You're progressing well," she announced after examining Maggie. "First babies usually take their time, but this one seems eager to meet the world. Probably have you delivered by nightfall." Nightfall seemed impossibly far away. Each contraction was lasting longer, hitting harder, leaving Maggie gasping and shaking. Between them, she could hear the children's voices from the main room where Sarah was keeping them occupied, could hear Ethan's footsteps pacing outside the bedroom door, could feel her body opening and stretching in ways that were both natural and terrifying. "I can't do this," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction that made her vision go white at the edges. "You are doing it," Mrs. Patterson corrected, her hands gentle but firm on Maggie's belly. Your body knows what to do, girl. You just need to trust it. But trusting her body had never been Maggie's strength. Her body had always been the enemy, the thing that marked her as wrong and unwanted. How was she supposed to trust it now with the most important task of her life? As if sensing her thoughts, Mrs. Patterson fixed her with a stern look. I've delivered babies from women half your size and twice your size. Big women, small women, strong women, weak women. And you want to know what I've learned? Maggie could only nod, too exhausted to speak. Size doesn't matter worth a damn. What matters is will, the determination to see it through no matter how hard it gets. And you've got will in spades, Mrs. Rowland. I can see it in you. You just need to believe in it yourself. The afternoon dragged into evening with excruciating slowness. The contractions came faster, harder, leaving less time to rest between them. Maggie lost track of time, lost track of everything except the waves of pain that consumed her entire world. At some point, Ethan came back in, and she clutched his hand like a drowning woman grabbing a rope. I'm here, he kept saying. I'm right here, Maggie. You're doing so well. It hurts, she sobbed. Ethan, it hurts so much. I know, love. I know. He pressed kisses to her sweat-dampened hair, her forehead, her trembling hands. But you're almost there. Mrs. Patterson says the baby's coming soon. Soon turned out to be another 3 hours of pushing that left Maggie convinced she was being torn in half. She screamed until her voice went raw, gripped Ethan's hand hard enough to leave bruises, and several times insisted she absolutely could not continue. You can, and you will, Mrs. Patterson said with brisk encouragement. The baby's head is crowning. A few more good pushes, and you'll be holding your child. I can't. You can. Ethan's voice broke through her panic. Maggie, look at me. Look at me. She forced her eyes open, found his face close to hers, his eyes fierce with love and certainty. You threw yourself in front of a moving train for a child you didn't know, he said. You left everything familiar to start over in a place that had already rejected you. You've loved my broken family back to wholeness. You can do this. I know you can. The next contraction built like a wave, and Maggie bore down with everything she had left. She felt something shift, felt a burning pressure that intensified until she was certain she couldn't survive it, and then suddenly, mercifully, release. A thin wail filled the room. It's a girl, Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice warm with satisfaction. A beautiful, healthy girl. Maggie collapsed back against the pillows, shaking and sobbing and utterly spent. Through the haze of exhaustion, she watched Mrs. Patterson work over the baby with practiced efficiency, cleaning and wrapping the tiny body in soft cloth. Then the woman was placing a warm, squirming bundle in Maggie's arms, and she was looking down at her daughter's red, wrinkled face for the first time. Hello, she whispered, her voice breaking. Hello, sweet girl. I'm your mama. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused, and Maggie felt something in her chest crack wide open. This was her child, her daughter, born from a body she'd hated her whole life, brought into the world through strength she hadn't known she possessed. She's perfect, Ethan breathed beside her. His hand touched the baby's tiny head with infinite gentleness. Maggie, she's absolutely perfect. She needs a name, Mrs. Patterson said, finishing her cleanup with efficient movements. What will you call her? Maggie looked at Ethan, and they had one of those silent conversations that married couples develop. Then Ethan smiled, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Hope, he said softly. Her name is Hope. After Mrs. Patterson left with promises to return the next day, and after Maggie had been cleaned up and settled with the baby nursing at her breast, Ethan brought the children in to meet their new sister. Jacob approached cautiously, his eyes huge as he stared at the tiny bundle in Maggie's arms. She's so small. Was I that small? Smaller, Ethan said with a smile. You and Emma both. You came early and scared your mama half to death with how tiny you were. Emma had no such hesitation. She climbed right up onto the bed, peering at Hope's face with intense interest. She looks like a little old man, she announced. Why is she all wrinkly? All babies are wrinkly at first, Maggie explained, too tired to be anything but honest. She'll smooth out in a few days. Can I hold her? When she's done eating, maybe, if you're very careful. It was Sarah who hung back, standing near the door with an expression Maggie couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, the girl's face crumpled slightly before she got it under control. Sarah? Maggie's voice was gentle. Come meet your sister. She's not my sister. The words came out harsh, defensive. Not really. She's your daughter with Papa. Me and Jacob and Emma, we're from before. We're different. The statement hung in the air, painful in its raw honesty. Ethan moved toward Sarah, but Maggie stopped him with a look. You're right, she said quietly. Hope is my daughter in a way that's different from you three. I didn't give birth to you. I didn't know you as babies. I came into your lives when you were already formed, already yourselves. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Then why should I care about her? Because she's going to need you, Maggie said. She's going to need a big sister who can teach her things I don't know, who can show her how to be brave and strong and honest. She's going to need someone who remembers her mother, your mother, and can tell her stories about the woman who made this family possible. Mama's dead. Yes, and nothing changes that. But Emma and Jacob barely remember her, and Hope will never know her at all. You're the keeper of those memories, Sarah. You're the bridge between what was and what is. Maggie shifted the baby carefully, reaching out her free hand toward the girl. I'm not trying to replace your mother or make you forget her. I'm asking you to help me honor her by loving the family she started, by being the incredible big sister I know you can be. Sarah stood frozen for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she crossed to the bed and took Maggie's hand, her grip tight and trembling. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what, sweetheart? That if I love the baby, I'm betraying Mama. That if I'm happy, I'm forgetting her. Sarah's voice broke. And I don't want to forget. I don't want any of us to forget. Then we won't. Ethan moved to stand behind Sarah, his hands on her shoulders. We'll tell stories about her. We'll remember the things she loved, the way she laughed, the lessons she taught. Your Mama will always be part of this family, Sarah. Always. Even with Hope here? Especially with Hope here. Maggie looked down at the baby nursing contentedly at her breast. Because Hope exists because of all of us. Because I came west looking for one thing and found something completely different. Because your family needed help and took a chance on a stranger. Because we chose to build something new while honoring what came before. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then leaned in to look at Hope more closely. The baby had finished nursing and was starting to drift off to sleep, her tiny fist curled against Maggie's chest. She does kind of look like Mama did in the old pictures, Sarah said softly. The same nose, I think, and the shape of her eyes. Then she carries part of your mother with her, Maggie said, along with parts of your father and parts of me and parts that are entirely her own. That's how families work, Sarah. We're all made of everyone who came before while still being completely ourselves. The girl was quiet for a moment, studying the baby's sleeping face. Then, very gently, she reached out and touched Hope's tiny hand. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around Sarah's, holding on with surprising strength. Hello, Hope, Sarah whispered. I'm your big sister, and I promise I'll take good care of you. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed and Hope was sleeping in the cradle Ethan had built beside their bed, Maggie lay awake watching her husband hold their daughter with a tenderness that made her chest ache. What are you thinking? She asked softly. That I can't believe she's real. Ethan's voice was hushed, reverent. That we made this perfect little person. That you went through hell to bring her into the world and somehow survived. Mrs. Patterson says I did well for a first-time mother. You did more than well. You were magnificent. He looked up from the baby to meet Maggie's eyes. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life, or more in love. The words settled warm in Maggie's chest, pushing back against the lingering fear and exhaustion. I was terrified the whole time, convinced something would go wrong, that I'd fail at this like I'd failed at everything else. You haven't failed at anything, Ethan said firmly. Not one single thing, and certainly not this. He carefully laid Hope back in her cradle, then climbed into bed beside Maggie, gathering her carefully into his arms. You're a mother now, to all four of them, and you're exactly the mother they need. Maggie rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. Through the window, she could see the Wyoming night spread vast and star-filled above the valley. Somewhere out there was the life she'd left behind in Boston, the aunt who'd never seen her worth, the society that had deemed her unsuitable, the future that had seemed so bleak and hopeless. But here, in this bedroom, in this ranch house, in this hard, beautiful country, she'd found something she'd never dared hope for. A husband who loved her completely, children who needed her and trusted her and were slowly, gradually learning to love her back. A daughter of her own body, living proof that she was capable of creating life instead of just surviving it. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked away. For wanting me when I thought I was unwanted. For giving me a family when I thought I'd always be alone." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Maggie, you gave me all of those things too. We saved each other." Maybe that was true. Maybe they'd both been drowning in their own ways, her in rejection and invisibility, him in grief and overwhelming responsibility, and had grabbed onto each other like lifelines. Maybe there was no shame in that, no weakness in needing someone else's strength to survive. The baby stirred in her cradle, making the soft mewling sounds that Maggie was already learning meant she'd wake soon, needing to nurse. Ethan kissed Maggie's forehead and reluctantly released her. "I'll get her," he said. But Maggie was already sitting up, reaching for her daughter. Her body ached, her breasts were sore, exhaustion pulled at every muscle. But when she settled hope against her chest and felt the baby's tiny mouth find her breast with unerring instinct, something inside her settled too. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Hope was a good baby, as babies went, but she still woke every 2 hours needing to eat, needed constant holding and soothing, and produced an astonishing amount of laundry for someone so small. Maggie moved through the days in an exhausted haze. Her entire world narrowed to the immediate needs of an infant who depended on her for everything. But she wasn't alone in it. Sarah stepped up in ways that amazed everyone, taking over much of the cooking and helping with the younger children without being asked. Emma became Hope's devoted guardian, sitting beside the cradle for hours singing off-key lullabies and reporting every tiny change in the baby's expression. Jacob was less interested in the baby herself, but took enormous pride in being a big brother, telling anyone who'd listen about his new sister. And Ethan was everything Maggie hadn't known a husband could be. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Hope when she was fussy so Maggie could sleep, took over the household tasks that had been Maggie's domain so she could focus on recovering and nursing. He never once suggested she was doing anything wrong or complained about the changes a baby brought to their lives. "You're so good with her," Maggie said one evening, watching him rock Hope to sleep with practiced ease. "I've had practice," Ethan reminded her. "Though I'll admit I didn't do as much of this with the twins. Anna handled most of the infant care while I focused on keeping the ranch running." He looked down at Hope's sleeping face. "I regret that now, missing those early months with them." "You're not missing them with Hope." "No." His smile was soft. "I'm not. And I have you to thank for that, for making me see that being a father means more than just providing, that these moments matter." 3 weeks after Hope's birth, a letter arrived from Charlotte Garrett. Maggie almost threw it in the fire unopened, but something made her break the seal instead. The letter was surprisingly brief, written in an elegant hand that matched Charlotte's cultivated appearance. It contained an apology. Charlotte wrote that she'd spoken with her brother Howard after her visit to the Rowland Ranch, and he'd finally admitted the truth about why he'd canceled the wedding arrangements. It hadn't been Maggie's appearance at all. Howard had already been courting a local widow when he'd placed the mail-order bride advertisement, and when the widow agreed to marry him, he'd sent the telegram to Maggie in a panic. The photograph had been convenient excuse, a way to reject Maggie without admitting he'd been dishonest about his availability from the start. Charlotte had come to the ranch planning to drive Maggie away with cruelty, believing she was a schemer who'd trapped Ethan into marriage. But seeing them together, seeing the children's genuine affection and Ethan's obvious love, had forced her to reconsider. She wrote that she'd been wrong, that her cruelty was inexcusable, and that she hoped Maggie could find it in herself to forgive both Garretts for their treatment of her. Maggie read the letter twice, then set it carefully on the table. The apology should have felt vindicating, should have eased the old wound of that rejection. Instead, she just felt tired. "What does she want?" Ethan asked, coming in from the barn to find her staring at the paper. "To apologize, apparently, and to explain that Howard's rejection had nothing to do with my appearance. He was already engaged to someone else when I arrived." Ethan's face darkened. "He let you believe you weren't good enough when the whole time he was just a lying coward?" "Yes." Maggie looked down at Hope sleeping in her arms. "Though if he'd been honest, if he'd married me like he promised, I wouldn't have been on that platform when Emma ran. I wouldn't have met you or the children. I wouldn't have Hope." The truth of it settled strange and uncomfortable. Howard Garrett's lies and cowardice had hurt her terribly, had reopened every wound of inadequacy and rejection she'd carried from Boston. But they'd also led her here, to this life she'd never imagined wanting. "Are you going to forgive her?" Ethan asked. "I don't know." Maggie traced Hope's tiny features with one finger. "Part of me wants to. She was cruel, but she owned it and apologized. That takes courage. And the other part? The other part remembers what she said. About me trapping you, about the baby being some kind of scheme. It remembers every insult, every implication that I'm not good enough for you." Ethan knelt beside her chair, his hand covering hers on Hope's sleeping form. "You are more than good enough for me, Maggie. You're everything I need and didn't know I was looking for. Don't let her words, or anyone's words, make you doubt that." "I'm trying not to." Maggie leaned into his strength. "But sometimes the old voices are so loud, the ones that say I'm too much and not enough all at once, that I don't deserve this happiness. Then we need to make new voices louder." Ethan kissed her temple. "Every day, as many times as it takes, until you believe what I see when I look at you. A woman of extraordinary courage and kindness who saved my family and gave me a second chance at love." That night, Maggie wrote a brief response to Charlotte Garrett. She accepted the apology, but made it clear that the friendship Charlotte seemed to be tentatively offering wasn't something Maggie was ready for. "Perhaps someday," she wrote, "but not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the trust too fragile." She sealed the letter and gave it to Ethan to mail, then turned her attention back to the life she was building. A life that had started with rejection and heartbreak, but had somehow transformed into something rich and full and worth fighting for. Hope was 6 weeks old when Maggie finally worked up the courage to face the trunk in the corner of her room, the one she'd brought from Boston and barely touched since her arrival. Inside, carefully folded and preserved, was the wedding dress she'd made for her marriage to Howard Garrett. She pulled it out slowly, the white fabric looking oddly foreign in the simple frontier bedroom. The embroidered flowers she'd spent hours stitching, the delicate lace she'd saved for months to afford, the tiny buttons running down the back that had seemed so elegant in Boston, but now just looked impractical. "What are you doing?" Maggie turned to find Sarah in the doorway, curiosity and concern warring on her young face. "Looking at the dress I was supposed to wear to marry a man who didn't want me," Maggie said honestly. Sarah came closer, touching the fabric with careful fingers. "It's beautiful. It was meant for a different life, and a different Maggie who still thought beauty and smallness were what made someone valuable." Maggie held the dress up against herself, seeing how it would have fit before pregnancy, before childbirth, before her body had changed in ways both subtle and profound. "I don't think she exists anymore. What are you going to do with it?" Maggie considered the question, running her hands over fabric that represented so much hope and heartbreak. Then, decisively, she began removing the lace trim, the embroidered panels, the delicate details she'd labored over. "I'm going to make it into something new," she said. "Christening gowns for Hope and any other children we might have. A new dress for you. Handkerchiefs, quilts, whatever feels right. I'm taking something that was meant for a marriage that didn't happen and transforming it into pieces of the marriage I actually have." Sarah watched her work for a moment, then smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "I think Mama would have liked that. She was always about making beautiful things from scraps and leftovers." "Then help me," Maggie invited. "We'll do it together." They spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship, carefully dismantling the wedding dress and planning new purposes for its pieces. The white fabric would become a christening gown for Hope. The lace would trim a new dress for Emma. The embroidered panels would be transformed into a quilt square commemorating this strange, wonderful journey from rejection to belonging. As they worked, Maggie felt something inside her release. She'd been holding on to that dress as evidence of her unworthiness, physical proof that she'd been rejected and found wanting. But looking at it now, seeing it transformed from symbol of failure into materials for new creation, she understood that rejection hadn't been the end of her story. It had been the beginning. Hope's christening took place on a crisp September morning when the aspens had just begun their turn to gold and the air carried the first hint of the winter to come. The small church in Cheyenne was filled with neighbors and ranching families who'd become friends over the past year. Their weathered faces softened with the particular tenderness people reserved for babies and new beginnings. Maggie stood at the front of the church holding her daughter, who wore the christening gown made from the wedding dress that had once represented everything Maggie thought she'd lost. The white fabric had transformed beautifully under her and Sarah's careful hands, the delicate embroidery now adorning a garment that celebrated what Maggie had found instead. Beside her, Ethan held the twins while Sarah stood on her other side, solemn and proud in the new dress they'd made from the lace trim. The girl had insisted on standing with Maggie rather than with her siblings, a choice that had made Maggie's throat tight with emotion when Sarah announced it that morning. "We are gathered to welcome this child into our community," the pastor began, his voice carrying through the small church, "to celebrate new life and the family that surrounds her with love." As the ceremony progressed, Maggie found her attention drifting to the faces watching them. Mrs. Patterson, who'd helped bring Hope safely into the world and had become a dear friend in the months since. The neighboring ranchers who'd accepted Maggie without question once they saw how hard she worked and how much she loved Ethan's children. The townswomen who'd initially been curious about the mail-order bride, who'd somehow ended up married to someone else, but who'd gradually welcomed her into their circle once they recognized her kindness and competence. And there, in the back row, was Charlotte Garrett. Maggie hadn't expected her to come. The cautious correspondence they'd maintained since Charlotte's apology had been cordial but distant, more formality than friendship. But here she was, dressed simply for once, her expression uncertain as she met Maggie's surprised gaze. The ceremony concluded with the pastor's blessing over Hope, who chose that moment to let out an indignant wail that made the congregation laugh. Maggie soothed her daughter with practiced ease while Ethan beamed with pride, and Sarah reached out to touch Hope's tiny hand with a gentleness that still amazed Maggie every time she witnessed it. After the service, the congregation gathered outside where tables had been set up for the celebration meal. Maggie was immediately surrounded by well-wishers wanting to hold the baby and offer their congratulations, but she kept one eye on Charlotte, who lingered near the edge of the crowd looking oddly vulnerable. Finally, when Hope had been passed to Mrs. Patterson for admiration, Maggie made her way to where Charlotte stood. "I didn't expect to see you here," Maggie said quietly. "I wasn't sure I should come." Charlotte's usual confidence was nowhere in evidence. "But I needed to tell you something. In person." "All right." Charlotte took a breath, her hands twisting together in front of her. "My brother's marriage failed. The widow he chose over you, it lasted less than 6 months before she left him for a merchant in Denver. And watching him struggle with that loss, with his own poor judgment, made me realize something." She finally met Maggie's eyes. "He had the chance to marry a woman of substance, of real worth, and he threw it away for something that looked better on the surface but had no depth beneath. And I nearly did the same thing by driving you away from friendship because I was too proud to see past my own prejudices." "Charlotte, please, let me finish." Charlotte's voice was urgent now. "You're everything I was taught a woman shouldn't be. You're large, you speak your mind, you're not delicate or decorative. And yet you've built something real here. A marriage based on genuine partnership, children who adore you, a community that respects you. Everything I've been chasing my whole life with my careful appearance and calculated manners, you have without even trying." Maggie stared at her, seeing Charlotte clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as an adversary or even as Howard Garrett's cruel sister, but as another woman trapped by society's narrow definitions of worth, struggling to find her own value in a world that measured women by impossible standards. "You think I didn't try?" Maggie asked softly. "I spent 24 years trying to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable, trying to disappear myself into something palatable. It didn't work. I just became invisible instead. But now you're not. Now you're... Charlotte gestured helplessly at the scene around them, at Ethan laughing with the twins, at Sarah holding Hope with such careful pride, at the community gathered to celebrate Maggie's family. You're seen. You're valued. How did you do it? I stopped trying to be what other people wanted and started being what I actually am. Maggie's voice was gentle. I let myself be loved by people who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. And slowly, I started to believe them. Charlotte's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been taught to be. Then maybe it's time to learn. Maggie surprised herself by reaching out to take Charlotte's hand. It's terrifying and uncomfortable, and you'll want to give up a dozen times. But on the other side of that fear is a life that actually belongs to you instead of to everyone else's expectations. I don't know if I'm brave enough. Neither did I. Maggie squeezed Charlotte's hand. But here I am anyway. And if I can do it, so can you. They stood together in silence for a moment. Two women who'd started as enemies finding unexpected common ground in their shared struggle against the world's judgment. Then Hope started fussing, and Maggie excused herself to tend to her daughter, leaving Charlotte to contemplate whatever decision she was wrestling with. As Maggie settled into a quiet corner to nurse Hope, Sarah appeared with a plate of food. You need to eat, the girl said firmly. Mrs. Patterson said new mothers forget to take care of themselves. When did you become the caretaker? Maggie asked with a smile. When you taught me it was okay to care about people. Sarah sat beside her, her expression serious. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever miss Boston, your old life? The question surprised Maggie. She thought about it carefully while Hope nursed, considering what honesty required. Sometimes I miss the idea of Boston, she said finally. The comfort of familiar things, the ease of knowing where you fit, even if that fit was uncomfortable. But the actual life I had there, the loneliness, the constant feeling of being wrong, the future that held nothing but more of the same? She looked down at Hope's tiny face, then over at where Ethan was teaching Jacob how to properly shake hands with the other ranchers. No, I don't miss that at all. Good. Sarah's voice was fierce. Because we need you here. All of us. Even when I was angry about you marrying Papa, even when I didn't want to admit it, I needed you. We all did. Maggie's throat tightened with emotion. I needed all of you too. I just didn't know it yet. The celebration continued into the afternoon, filled with laughter and good food and the easy camaraderie of frontier neighbors who understood the value of community. Maggie moved through it all with Hope in her arms, accepting congratulations and advice with equal grace, marveling at how far she'd come from that devastated woman on the train platform a year ago. When the shadows began to lengthen and families started preparing to leave, Ethan found Maggie and drew her aside. There's something I want to show you, he said, his eyes bright with barely contained excitement. Come with me? He led her to the wagon where he'd stashed a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a photograph in an ornate frame, a family portrait they'd had taken the week before. All six of them together, Ethan and Maggie in the center, Sarah standing tall beside them, the twins sitting at their feet, and Maggie holding Hope in her arms. But what made Maggie catch her breath was the inscription Ethan had commissioned for the frame. The Rowland family, 1876. All of them. No distinctions between before and after, between Anna's children and Maggie's child. Just family. I wanted you to have this, Ethan said softly, to remember this moment. The day we officially welcomed Hope into our community, into our church, into the life we've built together. Maggie stared at the photograph, seeing herself as she truly was, not the unwanted spinster from Boston, but a frontier wife and mother surrounded by people who loved her. Her face was rounder than fashionable, her body fuller than ideal, but in this image she looked strong, capable, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for choosing me, for making me part of something I never thought I'd have. Thank you for saving my daughter's life, Ethan replied, his voice rough with emotion, for loving my broken family, for giving me hope in more ways than one. That evening, after they'd returned home and settled the exhausted children into bed, Maggie stood on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. The mountains were turning purple in the fading light, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, she could hear Ethan moving around the kitchen, cleaning up from the simple supper they'd shared. Hope was asleep in her cradle by the bed, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of infant breathing. Sarah was reading in her room, the lamp burning late as she devoured yet another book from the small library they'd been building. The twins were tangled together in sleep the way they always ended up despite starting the night in separate beds. This was her life now, this house, this family, this hard, beautiful country that asked everything of its inhabitants but gave back meaning and purpose in return. The screen door creaked as Ethan joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He passed one to her, then settled into the rocking chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "Successful day," he said. "Very." Maggie took a sip of coffee, savoring the warmth. "Thank you for the photograph, for including all of us like that. You are all of us. There's no my children and your child. There's just our family." Ethan reached for her hand. "I know Sarah struggled with that at first, but I think she's finally understanding it. The way she stood with you during the christening, the way she talks about Hope as her sister without hesitation, that's growth. She's a remarkable girl, they all are." Maggie paused, gathering courage for something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to adopt them. Legally, I mean. I want Sarah and Jacob and Emma to be mine in the eyes of the law, not just in our hearts." Ethan turned to stare at her, surprise and emotion warring on his face. "Maggie, I know it doesn't change anything practically. I'm already their mother in every way that matters, but I want it official. I want the world to know they're mine, that I chose them just as much as you chose me." She squeezed his hand. Would that be all right? Would the children want that?" "I think they'd be honored." Ethan's voice was thick. "I know I am. The fact that you want to claim them, to make that commitment legally binding, Maggie, it means everything." "Then we'll talk to them tomorrow, see how they feel about it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. Maggie thought about the journey that had brought her here, the telegram that had shattered her on the platform, the desperate leap to save a child she didn't know, the gradual unfolding of love she hadn't thought possible. Every terrible moment, every fear, every doubt had led her to this porch, this man, this family. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Howard Garrett had actually married you?" Ethan asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Sometimes," Maggie admitted, "but not longingly. More like curiosity about a path not taken. I think I would have been desperately unhappy. Married to a man who saw me as a convenience at best, trapped in a life that was just a different kind of invisible. Instead, you got me and 4 children and a life that's anything but invisible. Instead, I got everything I never knew I wanted." Maggie turned to meet his eyes. "A partner who sees my worth. Children who need me and love me. A purpose that goes beyond just existing. A home that feels like it was always meant to be mine." Ethan set his coffee aside and pulled Maggie into his arms, careful of her still healing body. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay, and the particular warmth that was just Ethan. "I love you," he said simply. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone. You've made me whole again, Maggie. You've made all of us whole." "I love you too." The words came easily now, without the fear that used to accompany them. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing past everything I thought made me unworthy. There was never anything to see past, just a woman of extraordinary courage who was exactly what we needed." The next morning, Maggie and Ethan gathered the children after breakfast to discuss the adoption. Sarah, Jacob, and Emma sat at the kitchen table with varying degrees of curiosity and concern on their faces. "We wanted to talk to you about something important," Ethan began. "Miss Maggie, your mother, has asked if she can adopt you 3. Make you legally hers, not just in our hearts, but in the law as well." The silence that followed was heavy with processing. Sarah's eyes went wide, Jacob looked confused, and Emma simply stared at Maggie with an unreadable expression. "What does that mean exactly?" Sarah asked carefully. "It means that legally, I would be your mother," Maggie explained, "just like I'm Hope's mother. It means if something happened to your father, I would have the legal right to keep you with me, to make decisions for you. It means on paper, in official records, you'd be mine." "But Mama," Emma's voice was small, "our real Mama would still be your real Mama," Maggie said firmly. "Nothing changes that, sweetheart. Anna Rowland gave birth to you, raised you for the first years of your life, loved you with everything she had. She'll always be your Mama. I'm just asking to be your mother too, to be official about the role I already have in your lives." Jacob was the first to speak. "So we'd have two mothers, one in heaven and one here?" "Yes, exactly that." "I think that's good," Jacob decided with 7-year-old certainty. "More mothers means more love, right?" Emma nodded slowly, climbing down from her chair to stand in front of Maggie. "And you wouldn't leave us? Even if Papa died, you'd keep us?" The question revealed the fear Emma had been carrying since her first mother's death, the terror that everyone she loved would eventually abandon her. Maggie knelt down to Emma's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "I would never leave you," she said with absolute conviction. "Never, Emma. You're my daughter in every way that matters, and making it legal just puts words to what's already true in my heart." Emma threw her arms around Maggie's neck, holding on with desperate strength. "Then yes, I want you to adopt me. I want to be yours officially." Jacob immediately agreed, excited by the idea of official paperwork making something real. But Sarah remained quiet, her face thoughtful and conflicted. "Sarah?" Ethan prompted gently. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Sarah paused, gathering her words carefully. "I'm thinking that when Mama died, I promised myself I'd never forget her, that I'd keep her alive by remembering everything about her. And part of me is scared that if Miss Maggie officially becomes my mother, I'm betraying that promise." Maggie's heart ached for this girl who'd been carrying such heavy burdens for so long. "What if I promise to help you keep that promise instead?" she said softly. "What if we agree that one of my jobs as your mother is to make sure you never forget Anna? That we tell stories about her, that we honor her memory, that we keep her alive through the love she planted in all of you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? Even though it might hurt to always be compared to her?" "Your mother set the foundation for this family," Maggie said. "Everything good about you three comes partly from her. Why would I want to erase that? She made you who you are, Sarah. Honoring her is honoring you." The girl was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded, a small jerky movement that spoke of a decision made despite lingering fear. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I want you to adopt me too." The legal process took several months to complete, requiring trips to Cheyenne to sign papers and appear before a judge who asked the children directly if they wanted Maggie to be their legal mother. All three answered yes without hesitation, and when the judge pronounced the adoption official, Sarah surprised everyone by asking if she could change her name. "To what?" the judge asked, confused. "Sarah Maggie Rowland," the girl said clearly. "I want to carry both my mother's names, the one who gave me life and the one who gave me a reason to keep living." Maggie had to excuse herself from the courtroom, overcome with emotion. Ethan found her in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. "That child," she managed, "that incredible, wise, beautiful child." "Takes after her mother," Ethan said with a smile. "Both of them." Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that piled deep and fierce winds that howled around the house for days at a time. But inside, the Rowland household was warm and full of life. Hope was crawling now, getting into everything with determined curiosity. The twins had grown 3 inches and were suddenly more interested in helping with ranch work than playing. Sarah was becoming a young woman, her sharp mind and kind heart making her someone the whole family relied on. And Maggie had finally stopped questioning whether she deserved the happiness she'd found. She'd learned to look in the mirror and see strength instead of failure, capability instead of inadequacy. Her body had carried and birthed a child, had worked hard alongside her husband to keep the ranch running, had endured the brutal demands of frontier life and emerged stronger for it. One evening in late December, Almost exactly a year after she'd married Ethan, Maggie was finishing the supper dishes when Sarah appeared at her elbow. "Can I talk to you about something?" the girl asked. "Of course." Maggie dried her hands and gave Sarah her full attention. "I've been thinking about Mama a lot lately," Sarah said, "about who she was and what she wanted for us. And I realized something." "What's that?" "She would have liked you." Sarah's voice was certain. "Not as a replacement, just as the person who came after her and loved us well. I think she'd be grateful you were here to catch us when she couldn't anymore." The statement, offered with Sarah's characteristic honesty, made Maggie's throat tight. "That means more than you know. I know I gave you a hard time at first. I was angry and scared, and I didn't want things to change." Sarah's eyes were bright with emotion. "But you never gave up on me. Even when I was difficult, even when I pushed you away, you just kept showing up, kept loving me anyway." "That's what mothers do," Maggie said softly. "I know." Sarah threw her arms around Maggie in a fierce hug. "Thank you for being mine, for choosing us when you didn't have to, for making our family whole again." Maggie held her daughter, and Sarah was fully, completely her daughter now, legally and emotionally, and felt the last lingering pieces of her old pain finally release. She'd come west expecting marriage to a stranger and rejection when she didn't measure up. Instead, she'd found a family that needed her exactly as she was, children who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself, a husband who loved her not despite her body, but with acceptance of all of her. That night, as she and Ethan prepared for bed, while Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, Maggie caught sight of the family photograph on their dresser. She studied it in the lamplight, seeing the truth it captured, a family built from loss and second chances, held together by choice and love and the stubborn determination to keep showing up for each other. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, coming to stand behind her. "That I spent my whole life feeling like I didn't fit anywhere," Maggie said, "like I was too much and not enough all at once. And then I came here and found a place that was shaped exactly right for who I am." Ethan wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder as they both looked at the photograph. "You didn't find a place shaped for you. You shaped yourself a place by being brave enough to stay when staying was hard." "We shaped it together," Maggie corrected. "All of us. This family isn't what I expected or what you expected. It's something we built from broken pieces, and somehow it's stronger for all the breaks." In the main room, they could hear Sarah reading to the twins, her voice carrying through the quiet house. Hope stirred in her cradle, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon for her evening feeding. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang its endless song against the windows. Maggie turned in Ethan's arms, rising on her toes to kiss him with the easy affection of a year's worth of marriage behind them. When she pulled back, he was smiling at her with such love that it still took her breath away. "I'm glad you stayed," he said simply. "I'm glad you asked me to." Later, after Hope had been fed and settled and the house had finally quieted for the night, Maggie stood at the bedroom window looking out over the snow-covered valley. The moon was full, turning everything silver and strange. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, devastated, rejected, convinced she had nothing to offer. That woman had stood on a train platform with nowhere to go and nothing to hope for. And then a child had run toward danger, and Maggie had moved without thinking, and everything had changed. She'd saved Emma that day, but in so many ways Emma had saved her too. All of them had. Ethan with his steady love, Sarah with her hard-won acceptance, Jacob with his easy affection, Hope with her very existence proving that Maggie's body was capable of creating life instead of just carrying shame. The bedroom door opened quietly, and Sarah appeared in her nightgown. "Can't sleep?" Maggie asked softly. "I had a dream about Mama," Sarah said. "A good one. She was smiling, and she told me she was proud of me, of all of us." Maggie opened her arms, and Sarah came into them despite being too old for such comfort. They stood together at the window looking out at the moonlit valley. "I think she would be proud," Maggie said. "You've grown so much, become so strong and wise and kind. That's her legacy living on in you." "And yours," Sarah said. "You've taught me things too, about courage and resilience and how love doesn't run out just because you share it with more people." They were quiet for a moment, comfortable in the silence. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Do you think you'll have more babies? The question surprised Maggie. I don't know, maybe. Would that bother you? No. Sarah's response was immediate and certain. I used to think it would. Used to think every new baby would push Mama further away from us. But now I understand that's not how it works. Each new person just makes the family bigger, makes room for more love. When did you get so wise? Maggie asked, echoing a question she'd asked many times before. I had good teachers. Sarah's smile was visible in the moonlight. Both of them. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that demanded hard work just to keep the household functioning. Maggie moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, starting fires, making breakfast, tending to Hope while managing the older children's needs. It was exhausting work, relentless in its demands, but she wouldn't have traded it for anything. Around mid-morning, a wagon appeared on the road to the ranch. Maggie watched from the kitchen window as it approached, recognizing Charlotte Garrett in the driver's seat. She set down the bread dough she'd been kneading and went to meet her unexpected visitor. Charlotte climbed down from the wagon, looking different somehow, less polished, more genuine. She wore a simple traveling dress, and her hair was arranged practically rather than fashionably. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, Charlotte said, but I wanted to tell you something in person. Come inside, it's freezing out here. Over coffee at the kitchen table while Hope napped and the older children did lessons with Sarah, Charlotte explained the reason for her visit. I've left my brother's household, she said, moved to Cheyenne and taken a position teaching at the new school they're building. It's not what my family expected of me, not what I was raised to do, but watching you last fall at the christening, seeing how you'd built a life on your own terms, it gave me courage to try the same. Maggie studied Charlotte's face, seeing the uncertainty beneath the brave words. And how are you finding it? Terrifying, Charlotte admitted with a shaky laugh. I'm not good at it yet. I don't know how to be myself instead of what everyone expects. But I'm learning, slowly. That's all any of us can do. Maggie refilled Charlotte's coffee. Learn slowly and forgive ourselves when we stumble. I was hoping, Charlotte paused, gathering courage. I was hoping we might be friends. Real friends, not just polite acquaintances. I know I don't deserve your friendship after how I treated you, but I'd like to earn it if you'd give me the chance. Maggie considered the request carefully. A year ago, she would have rejected it out of fear or lingering hurt. But she'd learned something about second chances in that time, about the possibility of transformation and growth. I think we could be friends, she said slowly. But friendship requires honesty, Charlotte. No more cruelty disguised as concern. No more judgment about my body or my worth. I know, and I promise, no more of that. Charlotte's voice was earnest. You were right when you said I was trapped by society's definitions. I'm trying to break free of that, trying to learn what you already know about being enough exactly as you are. Then we'll learn together, Maggie decided. You can teach me about running a school, and I'll teach you about believing in yourself. Fair trade? Charlotte's smile was tremulous but genuine. More than fair. After Charlotte left, Maggie found herself thinking about the strange paths that had led them both to this point. Two women who'd started as enemies, shaped by the same crushing expectations but responding to them in different ways. Charlotte had tried to conform, to make herself acceptable through careful presentation and calculated choices. Maggie had eventually rejected conformity altogether, choosing authenticity over acceptance. And now they were both finding their way toward the same truth. That a woman's worth had nothing to do with her size or appearance or adherence to society's narrow standards. That strength came from choosing yourself, even when the whole world suggested you shouldn't. Spring arrived slowly that year, the snow reluctant to release its grip on the valley. But when it finally came, it brought new life in a dozen different forms. The ranch animals had calves and foals. The garden Maggie and Sarah planted together sent up green shoots. Hope took her first wobbling steps while the whole family cheered, and Maggie discovered she was pregnant again. She told Ethan on a warm May evening while they sat on the porch watching the twins play with Hope in the yard. Sarah was reading nearby, and the scene was so perfectly domestic that Maggie's heart ached with the fullness of it. We're going to need a bigger house, she said casually. Ethan looked at her, then down at where her hand rested on her still flat stomach, and his face transformed with joy. Another one? Another one, Maggie smiled. Due sometime in December, if my calculations are right. He pulled her into his arms, laughing with delight. A Christmas baby. Hope will be thrilled to have a sibling close to her age. Are you happy? Maggie asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Beyond words. Ethan kissed her thoroughly, not caring that the children might see. Every day with you is a gift, Maggie. Every child we have together just multiplies that gift. Sarah appeared beside them, having clearly overheard. Another baby? Really? Really? Maggie confirmed, watching the girl's face carefully for signs of the old resistance. But Sarah just grinned, looking more like the child she still was than the young woman she was becoming. Good. Hope needs someone to boss around the way I boss around the twins. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Maggie pulled out the quilt she and Sarah had been working on, the one made from pieces of her wedding dress. They decided to make it a family record of sorts, each square representing a significant moment. The christening gown fabric marked Hope's birth. The lace from Emma's dress commemorated the adoption. Sarah's carefully embroidered panel showed the family tree with both Anna and Maggie's names branching into the children's. Now Maggie added a new square, simple white fabric with a single word embroidered in careful stitches. Chosen. Chosen to stay when she could have left. Chosen to love when it was easier to protect herself. Chosen by Ethan, by the children, by this hard, beautiful life that had asked everything of her and given back more than she'd imagined possible. She thought about the telegram that had destroyed her a year and a half ago, about Howard Garrett's rejection and the devastating certainty that she'd never be wanted. That rejection had felt like the end of everything, like confirmation of every fear she'd ever carried about her unworthiness. But it had been the beginning instead. The beginning of a journey that had led her to this porch, this family, this life that fit her better than anything she'd tried to force herself into before. The wedding dress that had represented that rejection was now a quilt celebrating everything that had come after. The fabric meant for a marriage that didn't happen had been transformed into something commemorating the marriage that did. And wasn't that the perfect metaphor for her entire journey? Taking what seemed like failure and transforming it into something beautiful and meaningful and wholly her own. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked, coming to sit beside her. How far I've come. How different I am from the woman who stepped off that train in Cheyenne. Not so different, Ethan disagreed gently. That woman was already brave and kind and strong. She just didn't know it yet. Didn't have anyone telling her the truth about her worth. I have you telling me now. Maggie leaned into his warmth. Every day. Until I finally started believing it. And do you? Believe it? Maggie considered the question honestly. Most days. Some days the old voices still get loud, still try to tell me I'm not enough. But then I look at our children, at this life we've built, and the evidence of my worth is everywhere. In Sarah calling me mother. In Hope's smile. In the fact that you chose me and keep choosing me every single day. Just as you chose me, Ethan reminded her. This marriage, this family, it's built on mutual choice, mutual love, mutual commitment to keep showing up for each other. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Wyoming darkness. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch stretched quiet and peaceful, and Maggie felt something she'd never truly experienced before coming west, a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, hard winters and harsh summers, sick children and anxious nights, the constant demands of frontier life that never relented. But they also brought joy and abundance. 2 more children, a son they named Thomas and another daughter called Grace. Sarah growing into a remarkable young woman who eventually became a teacher herself. The twins developing into capable young people who loved the ranch life. Hope and her younger siblings growing up knowing they were loved and wanted and valued exactly as they were. And through it all, Maggie and Ethan built their partnership day by day, choice by choice. There were arguments and disagreements, moments of frustration and exhaustion. But beneath everything ran the steady current of commitment they'd made to each other that snowy February morning, to choose each other, to keep showing up, to build something meaningful from the broken pieces they'd both brought to the marriage. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Maggie with a new photograph to replace the one from Hope's christening. This one showed all 8 of them, Ethan and Maggie in the center looking older but happy, surrounded by their children in various stages of growth. Sarah was 18 now, poised on the edge of adulthood. The twins were gangly teenagers. Hope was a bright-eyed 9-year-old, and the younger 2 were sturdy, healthy children who'd never known anything but love and acceptance. Maggie studied the photograph for a long time, seeing the truth it captured. This was her family, built not from blood alone, but from choice and commitment and the stubborn determination to keep loving each other through every challenge. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going back to Boston? Building this life instead of the one you thought you wanted?" Maggie looked at him, this weathered rancher who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who'd loved her completely and without reservation, who'd given her a family and a purpose and a home that fit her perfectly. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life, this hard, beautiful, demanding life, it's everything I never knew I needed, everything I couldn't let myself hope for." That evening, she pulled out the quilt that had taken years to complete. Every square told a story, births and deaths, joys and sorrows, the ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. The fabric from her rejected wedding dress had been completely transformed, woven into a tapestry that celebrated everything she'd found instead of what she'd lost. She wrapped it around herself and stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Behind her, the house was alive with the sounds of her family, children laughing, Ethan calling for everyone to come to supper, the everyday chaos of a full household. This was what she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find, not the convenient marriage to a stranger who'd advertised for a wife, not the safe, small life she'd thought she wanted, but this wild, overwhelming, perfectly imperfect family that had taught her what it meant to be truly chosen. The screen door creaked and Hope appeared at her elbow. "Mama, are you coming? Papa says supper's ready." Mama. The word still made Maggie's heart full every time she heard it. She smiled down at her daughter, this child born from a body she'd spent years hating, proof that she was capable of creating life and sustaining it. "I'm coming, sweetheart." She took one last look at the valley spread out before her, at the mountains standing eternal against the darkening sky. Then she turned and followed her daughter inside, back to the warmth and noise and love of the family that had made her whole. The telegram that had shattered her on that train platform so many years ago had felt like an ending, the final proof that she would never be wanted, never be enough, never fit anywhere. But it had been a beginning instead, the beginning of a journey that had led her to this moment, this family, this life that was hers in every way that mattered. She'd been rejected and found wanting. She'd been stranded and alone and terrified. And from that devastation, she'd built something beautiful, something real, something chosen. As Maggie settled into her chair at the family table, surrounded by the people who loved her and the life she'd fought for, she finally understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. She hadn't been unwanted on that train platform. She'd been saved from a life that would have diminished her, freed to find the one that would let her flourish. And she had flourished. Against all odds and despite every doubt, she had bloomed into exactly who she was always meant to be, a wife, a mother, a woman of worth who'd finally learned to see herself the way the people who loved her had seen her all along, chosen, wanted, enough, more than enough, perfect exactly as she was, 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 exactly as she was.